Naruto walked slowly down the road, trying not to cry. Team 7 had just finished a C-rank mission in the Land of Waves. They had been protecting the master bridge builder, Tazuna. Naruto had not liked Tazuna at first, but as they traveled and he understood Tazuna's situation, had begun to feel some empathy towards the man. But throughout the whole mission, both Sasuke and Sakura had been insulting him and making him feel worthless. He acted as if their insults merely bounced off without making an impact, but they did. They hurt so much. Why did everyone hate him? Why? He wondered sadly. Every time he passed through the town, the villagers threw stones and knives at him, and even the students at the academy had hated him. He had no friends. Earlier today, Sakura Haruno, a kunoichi in his team, told him he was a loser and a dead last and that he should just go away and die somewhere. Why? Why do they hate me so much? He wondered again. For as long as he could remember, he had been hated by the villagers. Even Iruka-sensei hated him. His former sensei tried to act kindly towards him, but he could see the hatred in the man's eyes. Why? Why the hatred? Suddenly, Naruto heard a noise behind him. The 9-year-old turned, only to be met with a kunai that whizzed out of the darkness. No, he screamed mentally. Not again. Almost every week, an assassination attempt was made on his life as he went home. Most times, he managed to escape alive, but lately, they had been getting worse, as if stronger and stronger ninja were taking on the task to try and end his life. Naruto began to run as a hail of kunai fell around him. This was his only chance of survival, running. But it didn't last long. He felt a sudden breeze pass him, and suddenly, a masked shinobi stood in front of him. The small boy came to a sudden halt, and backed away, only to feel the point of a knife at his throat and the warmth of a body behind him. Heh, got you now, demon, said the masked ninja. Look at me, Biju boy, do you know what I am? Naruto fearfully shook his head, his small frame trembling in abject fear. The other shinobi behind him chuckled maliciously. I am an Anbu, said the shinobi, laughing sadistically at Naruto's horrified expression. Yes, I see that you know what I mean. Not so stupid as you look, Biju boy? Naruto's body began to shake in earnest. He knew what the man meant. Being an Anbu meant that the ninja before him had exceptional powers of killing and abuse. He would never escape alive. The ninja shifted and tightened his grip on the kunai in his hand. Let the fun begin, he said menacingly. The other ninja let go of Naruto and they proceeded to stab, kick and burn the boy with different jutsus. Naruto's body curled involuntarily into a fetal position, trying to escape the constant, brutal pain. A harsh kick met his side, and he screamed, feeling one of his ribs crack under the cruel pressure. He didn't know if he could take much more. One of his arms was already broken, and now his ribs. He already had multiple kicks to the head. Then he heard a voice. Kaden. Ryuka no Jutsu. A scream of utter agony was ripped from the young boy's throat as fire burnt his body mercilessly. He could feel his skin giving way under the 2 blasts of fire charring his body from either side. Why? Was his last thought, before slipping into unconsciousness. Why me? Naruto awoke slowly. His azure eyes cracked themselves open, straining to see through the murky darkness surrounding him. Where am I? He wondered. Am I dead? Silly kid. Of course you're not dead. Came a sudden, booming voice. Naruto jumped and looked around frantically. Who are you? He cried in fright. The murky water around his ankles splashing sluggishly with his movements. A laugh answered him. I am the Kyuubi no Kitsune, otherwise known as the 9-tailed demon fox. Naruto's eyes widened. What? He was extremely confused. The laugh came again. Come forward, Kit. Naruto looked doubtful. Just do it, came the voice again. Naruto took tentative steps forward, until he came to a huge cage. The small boy stared. He was even more confused now. Then he jumped back in surprise and slight fear. 2 huge, red, glowing eyes had appeared out of the darkness of the cage. They got bigger as the form came closer, revealing to Naruto a large crimson fox, with thick fur and 9 large bushy crimson tails. Who are you, and where am I? Queried Naruto uncertainly. The fox smiled, exposing sharp, pure white teeth and dangerous fangs and squatted down on his haunches. Naruto looked at it in confusion. Have a seat, Kit. This explanation is going to take a while. A chair suddenly appeared beside the boy, and Naruto sat down, looking expectantly at the fox. Its 9 tails swished before it began. Alright, for starters, I am the Kyuubi no Kitsune, or the 9-tailed demon fox. Surely you have heard stories of the demon who attacked Konohagakure no Sato during the reign of the Yondaime Hokage? Naruto nodded, still slightly confused. He couldn't see where this was going. The fox nodded and continued. Well, I am that demon. He waited for Naruto's reaction. He was not disappointed. The small boy freaked, almost falling off of his chair. Why you? What are you going to do to me? Kyuubi chuckled. Calm down, Kit, he ordered. Naruto instantly settled down. The fox proceeded with his explanation. I attacked the village because I had been put under a special seal by Madara Uchiha. When I came to, I was inside you. I decided to watch your life from inside your mindscape, in other words, from here inside this cage. Naruto stared. This was his mindscape? So, if Kyuubi was in his mindscape, and the Yondaime had sealed the demon inside a small child, then that meant that I am a Jinchuriki, he said out loud. The fox grunted in approval. Yes, Kit, you are indeed a Jinchuriki, a human sacrifice. Naruto nodded in understanding. Then his face fell. You are the reason why the villagers hate me, he stated quietly. Kyuubi grew quiet, not knowing what to reply to the statement. I'm sorry, Kit, but I had no control over what I did. Also, you should not let their foolish hate deter you from becoming strong. Naruto nodded, new understanding dawning on his small face. He suddenly perked up again. Are there other Jinchuriki? Yes, replied Kyuubi. There are actually 8 other Biju, but only 6 Jinchuriki. How is that? Asked Naruto. I would have thought that there would have been an equal number of Biju and Jinchuriki. Well, that is because not all of the Biju have been sealed. As I said, there are 8 other Biju besides me. I am the most powerful, being the 9 tails, and all the other Biju bow to my superior power. The line of Biju, starting with the weakest, is Ichibi no Shukaku, the 1 tails, Nibi no Bakaneko, the 2 tails, Sanbi no Kyodaigame, the 3 tails, Yanbi no Saru, the 4 tails, Gobi no Urukome, the 5 tails, Rokubi no Namakuji, the 6 tails, Shichibi no Kabutomushi, the 7 tails, Itachibi no Kyogyu, the 8 tails, and myself. Naruto was, to say the least, awed. Wow, he said, looking dazed. Kyuubi laughed, then grew serious. Kit, listen to me. If you stay in this village any longer, they will kill you. You must leave, tonight, and I will train you from inside your mindscape. Go home now, and start packing your things. Then, we will go to a different town, get you a change of clothing, and start your training. Naruto nodded in comprehension. Kyuubi continued. I have healed your wounds, just think about the outside world to leave your mindscape. You will be able to communicate with me at any time just by thinking whatever you want to say. Remember, do not speak out loud, or else you will attract unwanted attention. Hi, Naruto said, grinning. The small boy focused and thought of the road close to his home. As he did so, the murky landscape of his mind faded, and the real world came slowly back into focus. Naruto got up slowly from the ground. His body was unhurt. Kyuubi had healed all of his wounds. The blonde ran home, and began to pack, sealing all of his items in various generic seals. His only set of kunai, a few battered shuriken, and some simple exploding tags. We'll get you some new ninja tools when you leave, Kit, came Kyuubi's voice. For now, just concentrate on packing as quickly as you can, we need to leave before daybreak. Naruto followed Kyuubi's orders and began packing faster. It wasn't long before he finished. Being an orphan meant that he didn't have much belongings. Then he sat down and wrote a note to the Sandaime Hokage. Old man, I'm sorry, but I have to leave the village. I don't know if I'll be back or when I'll be back. If I have caused you any pain, again I'm sorry, but I couldn't take the hatred any longer. Naruto. Alright, come on now, Kit, came Kyuubi's impatient voice. Daybreak is nearing, we have to go. The blonde boy laid the note on the desk in his salon, and, pausing beside the table, raised his hand to his forehead. His fingers touched the cold metal of his Hite-8, and they stilled, as he tried to make a decision. Finally, with Kyuubi urging him to hurry, he drew off the item identifying him as a Konoha ninja and left the house without a second glance. Kakashi-sensei or Sasuke would find the note in the morning, when he did not come to practice. For now, he had to concentrate on getting across the border of the fire country. The boy ran with great speed through the town, leaping lightly from roof to roof as he went. He had to get to the gates as quickly as possible. If he waited until daybreak, the town would be awake then and it would be harder to leave. The large iron-wrought gates of Konohagakure no Sato soon came into view. Naruto snuck out, making sure the ninjas at the gate didn't sense him, or if they did, the only thing they would see would be a flash of orange and bright yellow. The blonde boy exhaled in relief as he passed the small ninja booth where the two Junin on guard duty sat. One obstacle down. Don't relax yet, Kit, came Kyuubi's deep voice. Remember, you still have to pass the fire country borders. Yeah, replied Naruto, picking up the pace. He only had about 2.5 hours before training time came around and therefore only 2.5 hours before he could safely say that no one had noticed his departure. Where do you want me to go? He asked Kyuubi. He had no idea which ninja village he should stop at first. Probably a smaller village, like Hidden in the Mist, or Hidden in the Cloud. Said Kyuubi, thoughtfully. I should opt for Hidden in the Cloud. You've already been to Hidden in the Mist, and so they know you there. We can't afford to let any ninja from Konohagakure to find out your location. Remember, you're a nuke nin now. Yeah, said Naruto, sighing. How far are we from the border, Kyuubi? There was a short pause as Kyuubi, through Naruto's eyes, tried to determine the distance in terms of time. I'd say about 1 hour, Kit. So go a little faster. Wordlessly, Naruto began to run faster, pumping chakra to his legs in order to give him more impetus. He only had about 45 minutes before his training time. With that in mind, the blonde boy ran faster and faster, until the forest began to thin out into a sort of desert. Well done, Kit. You've come out of the fire country. You're about 2 miles from Sunagakure now. Just be careful in that town. Hi, replied Naruto. He carefully concealed himself in a clump of trees and sat down, breathing slightly heavier than usual. That sure had been a rigorous run. Why are you stopping, Kit? Asked Kyuubi. Naruto's sweat dropped. Oi, just because you're a demon and don't need to eat or rest for a long period of time, doesn't mean that I can do the same, he said, slightly exasperated. Kyuubi snickered. Ignoring him, Naruto drew out 2 seals, one marked food, and the other marked water. He bit his thumb and swiped it once across each seal. With a faint poof, ninja rations, ramen and a canteen of water appeared on each scroll. Grinning hugely, Naruto picked up the ramen, but stopped when he realized he had no water. His face fell dramatically, and Kyuubi began to laugh. Itadakamisu, grumbled Naruto, picking up the ninja rations. Stupid Kyuubi, he thought. Hey, I can hear you, you know, said Kyuubi indignantly. Naruto smirked. That's the point. Naruto's chuckle filled the clearing as Kyuubi grumbled about ungrateful hosts and cheeky little brats. The blonde boy, finished with his meal, straightened and did some stretches, before repacking his scrolls and shrugging on his ninja backpack. Ready to go, he said excitedly to Kyuubi. I'm not going to stop in Sunagakure no Sato. I have enough energy and rations to last me until I reach Hidden in the Clouds. Besides, I can't risk being seen, even though I don't know any ninja from Hidden in the Sand. My blonde hair is too distinctive, they would definitely remember me if Sandame asked. And, I'm not sure whether or not they noticed my absence yet. Remember, I'm the village demon, so they can't afford me just going off like that. Sandame would also probably send some Anbu after me. True, remarked Kyuubi, impressed at his host's reasoning. Well, let's get going. Naruto sprang up and began running again. While he didn't mention it to Kyuubi, he was still slightly nervous that Sandame would send ninjas to bring him back to the village. And even though he was stronger than he let on, he would still be no match for a trained Junin. He subconsciously went faster, his nervous mind urging him on. He soon passed Sunagakure no Sato, grinning with victory when the sand ninjas didn't even look his way. Mission accomplished, Kyuubi, he said to his inner demon. He was met with snores. What? How could Kyuubi sleep whilst he was running for his life? Naruto grumbled to himself, then decided to keep an eye out whilst he ran. You never knew what or who might stop you as you traveled. Already the desert was beginning to give way to shrubs and taller trees, not exactly a forest, but normal foliage. He was getting closer to Hidden in the Clouds. Oi, wake up Kyuubi, he called to his sleeping demon. No response. Wake up, he yelled mentally. The snores were cut off abruptly as Kyuubi woke with a start. "What?" he growled. "Damn that kid for waking him up like that." Naruto chuckled. "We're close to Cloud," he told Kyuubi. "So I'm going to stop there." "Alright, Kit," replied Kyuubi. Naruto approached the gates of the village, only to be stopped by the customary Junin ninja at the gate. "Who are you, and where are you from?" queried the ninja blocking his way. Naruto looked him over. He was dressed in all black. Standard black ninja pants, a black mesh shirt, and a black flak jacket with the Junin cloud symbol at the back. He wore his Hite 8 around his neck loosely. "My name is..." Kyuubi interrupted. "Don't tell him your real name." Naruto continued with slight annoyance. Geez, couldn't Kyuubi give him some credit? He had already thought of an alias. Akuma Hiei, former Konoha nin. With a searching glance, the man stepped out of Naruto's pathway and gestured for him to enter. The blonde nodded, and entered the village, smiling grimly as he pondered his new name. Grieving Demon. It suited him. Naruto looked around at the village as he entered. It reminded him of Leaf, only on a smaller scale. He felt right at home. The only things missing were the Hokage Tower, and the glares and hateful comments from the passing villagers. But of course, he didn't miss the latter. "You'd better stock up on your ninja supplies, Kit," commented Kyuubi. "Good idea," replied Naruto. He looked around. Now where was the ninja store? Ah, there it is. The young boy walked over to the store and entered it. His eyes widened. It was chock full of every possible shinobi tool he could have ever imagined. Kunai, shuriken, katanas, exploding tags, backpacks, soldier pills, makibishi, kama, senbon, everything he had ever seen or used, and a few more which he was unfamiliar with. Where to start? He mused. Probably with the kunai, he needed a good set. Naruto strolled down the aisle of kunai, picking out choice ones made of different metal and different uses. Some he could channel chakra through, others he could code with chakra, and still others were made of a special metal that aided a shinobi's throwing technique. He browsed through until a special set caught his eye. They were obviously expensive, but he had lots of money, and this set would last him a long time. He picked them up and kept the others he had gathered along his way through the aisle. Next, the other aisle, he thought. Soon he had gathered quite an armful of tools: shuriken, kunai, senbon, makibishi, and a series of exploding tags of different proportions. He had also picked up a few generic seals, and one special seal for an idea he had in mind. Suddenly Kyuubi, who had been silent from the moment he entered the store, spoke up. "Get the kodachi on your right." Naruto looked in the direction that Kyuubi had pointed him in. His eyes landed on a slim-bladed sword with a black guard and gently curved contours. "Kodachi, huh? What do you want me to get this for, Kyuubi?" he asked. "I'm going to teach you kenjutsu, Kit. The art of swordsmanship," he added, knowing Naruto was about to ask him the meaning of kenjutsu. Naruto shrugged and picked it up. Whatever, Kyuubi must have a good reason. His arms full, he made his way to the front and laid the items in a heap in front of the proprietor. His pocket noticeably lighter, Naruto made his way across the street to the shinobi clothing store. His grin was obvious. It was time for something he had always wanted to do, but couldn't in Konoha, because no store would sell him proper shinobi clothing. To them, he was the demon of Konoha, and didn't deserve to become a shinobi. Naruto shrugged off the disturbing thoughts and entered the shop. An hour later, a completely different individual exited the shop. The blonde shinobi was dressed in standard black ninja pants, a black mesh shirt, and a black cloak that reached his knees. Instead of a Hite 8, a black silken cloth was wound around his head and tied at the back. He also wore combat boots, with weighted soles, and a small catch at the sides that released a small blade on the heel of the boot when hit. Black fingerless gloves adorned his hands with a pair of metal knuckles, and a belt was slung around his waist. Attached to the belt was a hip pouch containing his shinobi tools. A shiny kodachi was strapped to his back. The shinobi's face was concealed by a black mask that left only one blue eye visible and obscured all of his other features. His clothing showed off his muscled physique, telling every person who knew shinobi that this individual was one to be reckoned with. The figure stopped in the street, looking around. "What next, Kyuubi?" asked Naruto, scanning the street. Kyuubi thought for a moment. "Get something to eat, and some rest, then we'll look about staying in Cloud," ordered Kyuubi. Tomorrow we'll train. Okay, replied Naruto. The young blonde continued down the street, looking for a ramen shop. He soon found one and quickly entered it. In no time at all, he was sitting at a table in front of 10 steaming bowls of miso ramen, consuming them at an alarming rate. Naruto kept his eyes and ears out for any signs of danger while he ate, having learned the hard way from the Konoha villagers the merits of being wary. His efforts were rewarded. About 20 minutes after he entered the shop, on his fourth bowl of ramen, a tall, muscular man wearing shinobi's clothing under a daimyo's robes entered the shop. Naruto observed him discreetly whilst pretending to be wholly absorbed in his ramen. He was obviously an experienced shinobi. His tanned, worn face was littered with multiple scars, and black, piercing deep-set eyes roamed the shop quickly, searching for any possible spies, before leaning over the counter to speak in hushed tones to the proprietor. Naruto strained his ears, but couldn't hear. "Kyuubi, can you hear them?" he asked. "No, but you can," replied Kyuubi. Naruto frowned ever so slightly down at his ramen. "How? I tried straining my ears but I still can't hear." Kyuubi chuckled. "Not like that, kid. Just send some chakra to your ears, slowly, or else you will get a headache from the influx of sound." Naruto focused, and willed some chakra to his ears. A cacophony of sound immediately met his more sensitive organs, and the Jinchuriki had to focus on the two voices by the counter. Still managing to look absorbed in his food, Naruto began to eavesdrop. "Akuma Hiei? No, never heard of him. We'll see." The snatches of conversation only made Naruto more confused, and he retracted the chakra from his ears, preferring to meet whatever challenge awaited him head-on. "Kid, I think that something may happen to you when you come out," remarked Kyuubi. From his words, the daimyo probably wants to assess your level as a shinobi. They probably need to because they have no knowledge of an Akuma Hiei. Replied Naruto distantly. He just hoped that if they send shinobi after him, they would be either high chunin or low junin level. He couldn't afford to fight at full power and advertise to everyone his latent strength. The blonde shinobi pushed away his 10th bowl of ramen and came to his feet, his hunger sated. The daimyo had left the shop moments before, and as Naruto passed the proprietor, the plump man gave him a long, searching look. As Naruto stepped out into the street, the darkness immediately swallowed him, concealing him from prying eyes. Naruto suppressed the urge to look around to see if he was being tailed, and without a glance at the shadows surrounding him, continued down the street, walking as if he had not a care in the world. As he reached the center of the street, where a few villagers still walked, Naruto's sharp eyes caught a slight, stealthy movement as a lone shadow detached itself from the other black mass of shadows. He was being followed. "Someone's following us, kid," said Kyuubi, stating the obvious. "Yeah, I know," replied Naruto. "But I'm not going to fight out here in the open street." The blonde turned quickly down into a small, dimly lit street. After quickly checking that there was no threat around, he spun in the opposite direction to face his attacker. "What do you want?" he asked harshly, slipping into a taijutsu stance. He was going to use taijutsu only to defeat his opponent. He didn't want to waste chakra, nor show the entire shinobi world his true strength. The Kumo shinobi made no attempt at an answer. Instead, he lunged forward and began throwing powerful, high-speed punches and chops at various places on Naruto's body. Naruto easily dodged them all, parrying the blows with some of his own, and deciphering the mode of taijutsu. The man was obviously a taijutsu master. He was using the Ryusei style, a combination of the three simpler styles of Tora, Washi and Saru. Naruto smirked. He had already mastered Ryusei, and was currently working on Tasuki. Sarutobi had given him the taijutsu scrolls and hired an Anbu to help him practice. Within 7 months, Naruto was able to fight on an even level with the Anbu using the Ryusei style, and just before he became a genin, he had partially completed the Tasuki style. Naruto came back to the present, realizing that he had automatically been blocking his opponent's punches. He needed to end this spar now. Naruto dodged a super fast punch and quickly darted behind the Kumo shinobi, using his right foot to kick the surprised male in his neck. The shinobi toppled like a fallen tree, unconscious. Naruto grimaced. That last kick must have been too hard. Now what to do? Kyuubi interrupted his musings. Wake him up and make him take you to the daimyo. You could always use Kumogakure no Sato as your base if they become your ally. Naruto nodded. Good idea, he commented. Kyuubi just smirked in reply. Naruto walked over to the shinobi's prone figure and nudged him with a boot-clad foot. The man didn't move. Naruto sighed and drew out a canteen of water, and then splashed some onto the unconscious shinobi's face. That did it. The man woke with a start, then, seeing Naruto, instantly shifted into a defensive stance. Naruto simply looked at him and smirked. Take me to your daimyo, he ordered. I want to see him. Now. The shinobi looked undecided, and then he straightened and began to turn away. Come, he stated to Naruto. The blonde boy followed the shinobi through the town streets until they came to a large wooden building with no sign or name. The shinobi entered the wooden structure and Naruto followed. It was well lit, and obviously was a sort of waiting room, where citizens with complaints or shinobi looking for work could see the daimyo. Naruto stood silently beside the shinobi in the deserted room as he spoke in hushed tones to the shinobi secretary. Then he turned to Naruto. The daimyo will see you tomorrow morning here at 9 a.m. He is currently not in Kumogakure, my apologies. Naruto nodded to the two shinobi and exited the building, melting into the shadows. He made his way to the hotel at which he was staying and ascended to his room to have a talk with Kyuubi and a good rest. Kyuubi, do you think Konoha has noticed my disappearance yet? He queried of the demon fox. No, replied Kyuubi. I do not think your disappearance will be noted until tomorrow morning. Remember, this is not the first time you missed training. The last time you disappeared, you had been at the lake, and you told Kakashi that if ever you disappeared again, that is where you would be. By the time Kakashi remembers this, you'll be long gone, and it'll be tomorrow morning. Yeah, replied Naruto. I'm gonna get up at 6 a.m. for a few hours training before I meet with the daimyo. I've got a few jutsus to master. Good idea, Kit, commented Kyuubi. Now get some sleep, it is getting late. Replied Naruto, his eyes already beginning to droop closed. He was tired. Man, it felt good not having to worry about anyone coming in during the night. Naruto fell asleep, his slumber uninterrupted by nightmares for the first in his life. Naruto rolled over, his eyes cracking slightly open as he squinted in the warm glow of the morning sun's rays. His bed felt more comfortable than usual. He jerked to an upright position as yesterday's events filled his mind. He had to train. The blonde boy got up slowly and made his way to the bathroom to commence his morning ablutions. 20 minutes later, the blonde emerged from the bathroom fully awake, his spiky sun-kissed locks glistening and his clear blue eyes sparkling. Naruto dropped his towel and rummaged in his backpack for the scroll with his clothing. When he found it, he began to dress. 5 minutes later, Naruto was dressed and ready to go. The young shinobi adjusted his mask in the mirror, securing it so that only his azure eyes were visible. He turned on his heel and left the room, two thoughts in mind. He had to find a laundry shop, and he needed to find somewhere to train, undisturbed. He would eat after he had seen the daimyo. Naruto exited the hotel and entered the street, looking around for a laundry shop. When he found none, he shrugged and began heading out of the town in search of a training ground he could use. He soon found a series of training grounds on the edge of the town, away from the civilians. It was still early, so he had about an hour and a half to himself before any shinobi came out to train. Naruto rested his backpack against the base of a tree in the training grounds and began to train. First, he practiced throwing his new chakra knives and kunai, aiming them at the center of a circle he had carved into the tree. They had begun this exercise shortly before he left and completed it. He could throw a kunai decently, but sometimes his aim was off. He intended to make sure he had 100% accuracy when throwing. Then he moved to the chakra knives. He still couldn't get them to go the way he wanted, that is, they couldn't pierce both a tree and a rock in one single throw. Naruto was going to resolve that this morning, though. The blonde shinobi threw the chakra knives until he was satisfied with the quality of his aim, the power behind the throw, and the distance the tools went. Then he moved on to the Odama Rasengan. He had yet to perfect it. Naruto worked on forming the Rasengan as quickly as he could, aiming to improve his battle time. The longer he took to do a jutsu, the easier it would be to kill him. Then he sat down and drew out a scroll marked, Chakra Separation Seal. Naruto had been interested in seals ever since he had gone to the library to understand the concept of generic seals and found a book on chakra seals. It was then that he understood that the tattoo on his stomach was a seal, But he didn't know what it did, and he had always forgotten to ask Sarutobi. But now he knew, and there was no turning back. Naruto unfurled the scroll and surveyed it. This was his first scroll to be created. The chakra separation seal, he mused. It was an appropriate name. It would completely separate his and Kyuubi's chakra, and allow him to fully control all of Kyuubi's power should he need it, without gaining the physical form of a fox. With the seal, Kyuubi would be able to manifest himself, with Naruto controlling the amount of power he could have. Naruto looked back at the scroll. It was currently half finished, and he didn't know when he would complete it. He looked at his watch. About 40 minutes left. He picked up a reed pen and began to write kanji symbols on different parts of the scroll. He would make some progress on the scroll before he had to go to the daimyo. The blonde shinobi straightened, feeling his muscles pop from staying so long in one position. He checked his watch again. He had 5 minutes left. Naruto rolled the scroll, now littered with various kanji symbols, and tucked it away into his backpack. Then he made a few hand seals and disappeared from the training grounds in a sudden gust of wind. A few seconds later, Naruto stood on the main street of Kumogakure, revising the directions to the daimyo's office in his head. He began walking down a familiar road, taking turns every now and then as he remembered it from the night before. He soon stood in front of the drab building, surveying it coolly. He looked at his watch again. 9 a.m. It was time. Naruto took a breath and stepped forward into the building. As soon as he stepped into the small waiting room, the shinobi he had met previously at the secretary's desk stood up and gestured for him to go into the room behind him. "Hogaku-san is waiting," he stated politely. "Please enter." Naruto nodded to him and went through the blue door, shutting it quietly behind him. He turned around and looked at the room. It was sparse. Only a desk with a chair behind it and another chair in front of it occupied the room. The blonde's eyes moved to the figure in the chair behind the desk. The daimyo was obviously a former shinobi. His face was littered with countless scars, physical reminders of bitter battles, and his black hair was worn in a short, spiky style, extending down the sides of his face and jaw to form a short, neatly trimmed beard. Piercing gray eyes stared back at Naruto, assessing him. The daimyo gestured to the empty chair in front of him. "Take a seat," he said authoritatively. Naruto moved obediently from his position near the door and sat in the empty seat. When Naruto seated himself, the daimyo continued. "One of the many shinobi in this village told me of your request to see me." Naruto nodded in acknowledgement. "Why?" the daimyo queried. Naruto began. "When I arrived in Kumogakure, I went to a ramen shop, as you might know, seeing as you were there." Ignoring the flicker of surprise that crossed the daimyo's face at his statement, he went on. "I ate and left, but a Kumo shinobi followed me out and attacked me. I defeated him and revived him, then asked to see you. I want to know if I could be allowed to remain here." The daimyo looked thoughtful. "This matter is out of my hands. You will have to see the raikage." The daimyo got up from his chair and exited the room, Naruto following him. The two males exited the building and headed for the raikage's tower, set conspicuously in the middle of the town. When they reached the gate, the guards immediately let them through on seeing the daimyo. The daimyo and Naruto climbed a flight of stairs, and then walked down about 3 corridors, before they came to a halt in front of a green door. The daimyo raised a hand and knocked twice. Silence ensued, and then a deep voice came from behind the door. "Come in." The daimyo turned the knob and entered the room. Naruto looked around. The raikage's office was extremely similar to the Hokage's. A simple desk and chair in the center, and shelves of books and scrolls lining the walls. The raikage was a powerful-looking man. His white-yellow hair was scraped back and combed neatly, and his handlebar mustache and small beard were neatly trimmed. He wore no shirt, exposing his well-developed chest and pectoral muscles, and a standard black shinobi's pants. Bushy eyebrows lay on his tanned, slightly wrinkled face over a pair of piercing black eyes. The raikage turned to the daimyo. "Yes, Hogaku?" he queried, slightly impatient. The daimyo bowed in greeting before beginning. "Raikage-sama, this shinobi would like asylum in Kumogakure." There was no more to be said. The raikage turned his eyes on Naruto's black-clad frame. "What is your name and age?" he queried. Naruto prepared to answer. "Don't tell him your real name," said Kyuubi suddenly. "Duh," replied Naruto, annoyed. "Why do you always have to pop in when you're not needed?" He tuned out Kyuubi's indignant sputters and continued to speak. My name is Akuma Hiei. I am 9 years old, and a former genin of Konohagakure. The Raikage raised his eyebrows. 9 years old? Naruto nodded in reply. The Raikage and the daimyo exchanged a look, and then the Raikage turned back to the blonde. You may remain in Kumogakure if you wish. Only, please notify either myself or the daimyo of your comings and goings as a precaution. Naruto nodded in understanding. I will not become a Kumo shinobi, he began. But I will report to you and aid Kumogakure in any time of war. The Raikage nodded. Thank you. Is that all? Naruto and the daimyo nodded. Hi, you are dismissed. Konohagakure. Where's Naruto? Kakashi-sensei, asked Sasuke to his Junin teacher. The masked shinobi raised his head from his precious Icha book. He's not here again? Kakashi frowned. Something was wrong. Naruto never missed more than a day of practice. He was too eager to train and master new jutsus. The famous copy ninja put away the orange novel and stood. Wait here, Sakura, Sasuke, he ordered his other 2 genin students. I'm going to Naruto's apartment. Sakura humphed. It doesn't matter anyway, Kakashi-sensei, she said disdainfully. He's just a good-for-nothing annoyance. I hate him. It would be good if he just disappeared or died. Right, Sasuke-kun? She asked her idol, turning adoring eyes on the last Uchiha. Sasuke, as always, ignored the hopeful Sakura. He replied. Kakashi gave the pair one last searching look and then disappeared in a swirl of leaves, appearing directly in front of Naruto's apartment. Kakashi shook his head. He truly loved Naruto as a son, but the villagers and quite a few of Naruto's fellow ninja, younger and older alike, hated him. Even Kakashi himself had entertained doubts about the demon boy becoming a shinobi until he met the hyperactive Naruto. He shook his head again. He was ashamed to admit that he had favored Sasuke and Sakura over Naruto at the beginning, but a few months ago, he had come to his senses and tried to make up for it. The shinobi knocked on the door again. No reply. His brow furrowed. Why didn't Naruto answer his door? Was he sick? He immediately dismissed the idea. Naruto never got sick. The only time had ever missed training for an entire day was after a particularly bad week with Sakura and Sasuke's taunts, when he had gone to the Konoha lake to meditate and comfort himself. A feeling of intense dread began to build up in Kakashi. His instincts were telling him that something was very wrong, that he should check it out as quickly as possible. Since I am at his house already, I'll just go inside, he decided. Then I'll go to the Konoha lake. With that resolution in mind, Kakashi pried open the door to the apartment and stepped inside. It was deathly quiet. Naruto? Kakashi called. No reply. Then he noticed his surroundings properly, and he knew. He saw at the exact time that he knew. Naruto's house was always a chaotic mess, but it was extremely tidy, and a letter lay on the table on the lobby. Kakashi knew, before he even crossed the room to pick up the letter, that Naruto was gone. His heart sank as he noticed a shiny object under the letter. His Hite 8. Naruto had rejected Konoha in the most effective way possible. The paper rustled as Kakashi's wobbly fingers fumbled it open. His heart sank more with every word, until a tear rolled down his masked face. I'm sorry, Naruto, he thought in sadness. If only he had seen underneath the underneath, as all excellent shinobi do, to realize earlier that Naruto was not a demon, but just a lonely child with no parents or friends and an entire village of civilians and shinobi who hated him. Kakashi looked at the letter again, perusing the words written in Naruto's barely legible handwriting. It had been addressed not to him, but to the Sandaime Hokage. Old man, I'm sorry, but I have to leave the village. I don't know if I'll be back or when I'll be back. Did I have caused you any pain? Again I'm sorry, but I couldn't take the hatred any longer. Naruto. I couldn't take the hatred any longer. The words echoed in Kakashi's head as the masked ninja exited the apartment and headed for the Hokage's tower. Where would Naruto have gone? How could he survive? Did he have money, a place to stay? Kakashi felt as if his heart was ripping itself apart in grief and remorse. But it was too late. Naruto could be anywhere with the 2-day head start he had gotten. Kakashi knocked on the Hokage's office door. Come in, called the deep voice of the Sandaime Hokage. Kakashi entered, shutting the door quietly behind him. Sarutobi began to smile, but on seeing Kakashi's grave face and manner, instantly sobered and grew alert. What is it, Kakashi? He asked. Kakashi shook his head before wordlessly stepping forward and placing the letter before his superior. The Hokage read the note in silence, then looked up at Kakashi, a small tear making its way down his wrinkled, battle-worn face. We've failed miserably, haven't we, Kakashi? He asked humbly. In answer, a single tear rolled down the face of the usually mysterious, stoic ninja. No words were said, they were not needed. Their grief and remorse was equal. The Hokage shook his head. His burden was even greater than Kakashi's. Naruto was not just any kid, like the entire Konoha population thought him to be. He was the son of Namikaze Minato and Uzumaki Kushina, the Yondaime Hokage and his wife. Only the Sandaime Hokage and Jiraiya of the legendary Sannin III were aware of the SSS-classed secret. And now, he had failed in his promise to Minato. Sarutobi bowed his head in defeat, more tears making tracks down his wrinkled cheeks, and then he looked up at Kakashi. I will have to proclaim him a missing nin, with the rule that they are not allowed to kill him or severely harm him in any way during the retrieval. He said heavily. Kakashi, you gather the rookies and tell them, they should know. I will look about replacing Naruto on your team. Kakashi bowed. Hi, Hokage-sama, he replied, poofing out of the room, reappearing at the training grounds where he had left Sasuke and Sakura. The two genin mentioned turned to face their Junin sensei. Sasuke opened his mouth to query Kakashi, but shut it when he saw his teacher's grave expression. Something was wrong, and he had a feeling that it had to do with Naruto. Kakashi spoke to his students. Sasuke, Sakura, I want you both to do something for me. Sasuke, you call Team 10 to the training grounds. Sakura, you get Kurenai-sensei's team. I will notify Team Guy. Be back as quickly as possible, it is urgent. Sasuke and Sakura looked with some trepidation at each other as their sensei poofed away, before running to call the various teams of ninja. 5 minutes later, the entire group of genin teams and senseis had gathered at the training grounds, all in a state of confusion. What could be so important and urgent that Kakashi had had to gather them all here? The man in question soon poofed into existence in front of the puzzled shinobi and kunoichi. Kurenai stepped forward, her beautiful face creased in confusion and bewilderment. Kakashi, what? She began. Kakashi held up a gloved hand, halting her. He looked around at his fellow ninja before beginning to speak. This declaration is from the Sandaime Hokage. Uzumaki Naruto has disappeared and as from now, will be labeled a C-class missing nin. The reactions of genin and junin were basically alike, complete shock. Naruto? No way, yelled Inuzuka Kiba in complete denial and bewilderment. Yeah, joined in Tenten, Ino and Lee. The Meta Guy miniature look-alike continued his tirade. Naruto-kun is the epitome of youth. His being overflows with youthfulness. Naruto would never do such an unyoutful thing as leaving Konoha. The fuzzy-eyebrowed shinobi clung to his teacher, and the other ninja, expecting something horrible, were just able to look away in time. The two males clung to each other, screaming, Lee, Guy-sensei, shut up, yelled the suffering crowd of ninja. Enough was enough. They turned back to Kakashi. Hinata spoke up, Anyo, but Naruto-kun wouldn't do that. The Hyuga stuttered timidly, her small face showing her complete trust in the Uzumaki blonde. Kakashi shook his head. Sorry to disappoint you, but he really left. The copy ninja fished something out of his pocket. This is his Hite 8. The group fell silent, the undeniable proof of the Hite 8 before them countering all reasonable arguments they could think of. But why? Said an anguished Kiba. Kakashi shrugged. He knew, but he didn't feel it was his place to disclose that fact. Sakura spoke up, her face filled with triumphant malice. Why are you looking so sad? He did us a favor. That annoying demon brat, I'm glad he's gone. He could be dead for all I care. A shocked silence met her harsh words. Ino stared at her former best friend. Why are you saying that, Sakura? She asked in shock. He's your teammate, plus he's never done anything bad to you. How could you say that about Naruto? Sakura wheeled on Ino. Shut up, she screamed. You're just a stupid demon lover. What, you like him? She jeered, seeing Ino's shocked visage. He's a dead last, a loser and an idiot. Don't tell me you actually wanted to be his friend. Sakura scornfully crossed her arms and looked down her nose at a devastated Ino. Without another word or look to her fellow ninja, Ino turned and walked away, her stomach churning in anger, disappointment and hurt. How can Sakura be like that? Naruto is not a demon brat. He's a perfectly normal boy that was unfortunate to have everyone hate him. He always pretended to be cheerful and annoying, but Ino knew that on the inside, he was crying, his heart and soul were torn to pieces every time someone jeered and taunted him. And now he had left. A mental image of Naruto's whiskered face swam in front of Ino's eyes and a single tear rolled down her face. She had never told anyone, but she had had a crush on the other blonde ever since her first day at the academy. She loved everything about Naruto. His spiky blonde hair that would never be tamed, his determination to protect his precious people, and his endurance of all the hatred aimed at him for an unknown reason. For that reason, Ino never joined in with the other students and teachers in the academy in taunting him. She couldn't. "Naruto, I will get strong in your memory," she vowed. "You may not remember me, if you are alive, but I will remember you always by being as strong as I can, to protect my precious people, just like you did." The tears were coming faster now, and Ino wiped them hastily away with her arm, and forced herself to stop crying. Naruto was gone, but she could hug his memory close to her heart and grow strong for the boy she loved. Naruto entered the realtor's building. The blonde shinobi had tired of renting an apartment and decided to find a home for himself, a place that he could proudly call his own. As the door closed behind the Jinchuriki, the realtor at the desk looked up. Naruto approached him, slightly unsure as to what to do. "Ahaya," greeted the realtor. Naruto nodded in reply. "Ahaya," he answered. The realtor smiled. "And how may I help you?" Naruto filled in the obvious blank. "Akuma." The realtor nodded in acknowledgement and continued. "How may I help you, Akuma-san?" Naruto took a breath. "I would like a house to purchase. Not too far from the town, but yet not too near to the border, with sizable grounds and at least 2 bedrooms. The realtor smiled in delight. "I have just the house for you then, Akuma-san," he said enthusiastically. "I will come with you immediately to give you the tour." The realtor came around the desk and gestured for Naruto to precede him out the building. He closed and locked the door, then began walking down the street. Naruto followed, and the 2 males walked in silence until they came to the edge of the village. The realtor turned off onto a small, sheltered road, barely visible to the ignorant passerby. "The only thing this road leads to is the house," said the realtor, in a professional, sales mode tone. "It is in complete privacy, Akuma-san." Naruto nodded in approval. Privacy was exactly what he needed. A place to train in peace and secrecy. He would probably put a genjutsu on the house or something if he bought it, so that ninja having dujutsu with similar properties to the Sharingan or Byakugan would have no success in seeing inside. Their footsteps crunched over the dry leaves on the stone pathway as the realtor led his customer up to the house. They turned a few corners and then came to a halt. "Here we are," announced the realtor chirpily. Naruto could only stare. The house was perfect. It reminded him somewhat of the main house on the Hyuga compound, except that it was exceedingly more beautiful. Exotic flowers and giant oaks lined the garden and an elaborate, elegant koi pond, complete with masterfully constructed bamboo fountain and lilies, graced a corner of the property. Birds of all sizes, kinds and colors flitted from tree to tree, calling greetings to each other. The realtor turned to his customer. "Let us go inside, Akuma-san," he said, smiling pleasantly. Naruto numbly followed the man along the pathway and through the door of the dream house. As they surveyed the building, Naruto knew it was perfect. He decided to contact Kyubi, knowing that the demon could see everything through his own eyes. "Whatcha think, Kyubi?" he asked his demon inhabitant. "You should get the house, kid. It is a great investment." The fox recommended. "Yeah, I know, it's perfect," replied Naruto. It was true. The house was perfect in every way. It had 3 bedrooms, a bare room that could be converted to a training room if he wished, a spacious kitchen, study, library, dining room, and party room, plus a balcony with a wonderful sunset and sunrise view. Naruto turned to the ecstatic realtor. "I'll take it," he said coolly. The realtor's eyes gleamed, and Naruto could almost hear the cogs of his brains working furiously as they added up a profitable figure for the house. "Hi, Akuma-san. Arigato gozaimasu. We should probably head back to my office now to complete the transaction and paperwork." Naruto and the realtor left the house and headed back to the realtor's office. The man went quickly around to his desk. "Have a seat please, Akuma-san," he requested politely, gesturing to a wooden chair in front of his desk. He waited until Naruto sat, then seated himself. "The price is 1 million ryo." Without hesitation, Naruto drew out a checkbook and signed his name, the date and amount before handing it over to the realtor. He didn't need to worry about verifying the check. He had never banked money in Konoha, instead saving it in a scroll that he carried with him at all times. When he got to Kumo, he banked it. In return, the realtor filled out the property deeds, land titles, and other legal documents, and gave them to Naruto, along with the house key. As he took the key, Naruto reminded himself to have the locks change. "You could never be too careful. Thank you for your business, Akuma-san," said the courteous realtor, bowing him out. Naruto raised a hand in acknowledgement and continued down the street. He had some house furnishing to do. Over the next few weeks, Naruto managed to furnish his new house to his satisfaction. He had even gone back to the ninja weaponry shop and purchased quite a few items to properly outfit his training room and stock his supplies closet. He had also placed the dujutsu repelling genjutsu he had created on the house. It would do to have any shinobi or kunoichi spying on him. As the weeks lengthened into months, Naruto became a known figure in the streets of Kumogakure. Most ninja knew to leave him alone, knowing that he preferred solitude, but the children also knew that he would not be unfriendly to them and greeted him cheerily when he passed. Naruto, or Akuma Hiei as he was known in Kumogakure, had quite a following of fangirls. He had never been so glad for the genjutsu as he had been the morning when he woke up to find almost all of Kumogakure's kunoichi endeavoring to see through his walls with dujutsu-similar binoculars and telescopes. Naruto had begun a rigorous training regimen the week after he moved in, and even worked on the chakra separation seal in his free moments. Sometimes he took on missions within Kumogakure, for example, escorting extremely important personnel and once, to test the Kumogakure's Chunin shinobi before they left for the Junin exams in Konohagakure. Naruto had managed to master the Odama Rasengan, the Kokwangyo no Jutsu, and the Shunshin no Jutsu, and, in addition to the chakra separation seal, begun work on a jutsu he called Hiraishin no Jutsu. Basically, it was an updated version of the Shunshin. He had gone to the blacksmiths to get him to create some special seal-absorbent kunai that he had designed specifically for the Hiraishin technique. When Naruto had informed Kyuubi of the technique, Kyuubi had acted strangely. For the first time since Naruto had known the demon, it had actually looked shocked, and even a little intimidated. He had muttered something about, like father, son, but Naruto didn't quite catch it, and Kyuubi stubbornly refused to repeat it. He didn't press the matter. He was too busy training and developing new techniques, mastering others he already knew, and trying to raise his chakra level so he didn't have to rely on Kyuubi's power. According to Kyuubi, his current chakra level was about equal to 3.5 taels of Kyuubi's own chakra. But Naruto knew that it wasn't enough. He wanted to be strong with his own chakra. He would only use the demon's chakra in desperate situations. Or, maybe, never again. He could actually feel his chakra reserves growing with each month that passed. In no time at all, 2 years had passed, and Naruto had not left Kumogakure, nor had he heard anything of a missing nin named Uzumaki Naruto. All was well. The blonde shinobi stretched in his large, luxurious bed and padded barefoot to the adjoining bathroom to clean up before the day's training. Naruto stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, marveling at the changes that had hit his body as soon as he became 12. His golden blonde hair had grown quite a bit over the past 2 years, the front side bangs not quite reaching his chin, and the whisker marks had partially faded. His eyes now had a more feline slant to them, and he had overheard on Kunoichi fangirl describing them as smoky blue bedroom eyes. He also had a fairly muscular physique from all the training Kyuubi put him through. His eyes moved to the black bracelets around each forearm and wrist and ankle, each weighing 150 pounds. There were 6 in total, so that meant that he was wearing 0.900 pounds? He had never really thought about it before. He dismissed the thought, and continued his lazy perusal of the changes his body had experienced. His body had experienced a major growth spurt sometime last year. He had shot up from about 4 inches 6 to about 5 feet 0 inches, now on the taller end of the male height scale for his age. He had also progressed by leaps and bounds in his training, and the shinobi that now stood before the mirror was a far cry from the lost little boy who left Konohagakure at daybreak 2 years ago. His chakra had also grown. Now he had about 5 taels worth if his chakra was measured against Kyuubi's, and it was still growing. His thoughts were interrupted by Kyuubi himself. "Kit, you should leave and search out Kana," said Kyuubi to his host. Naruto raised his eyebrow. "Kana? Isn't that the famous swordmaster? Is that what made you so silent for the past week?" To be frank, Naruto had been not a little puzzled and worried at the demon's uncharacteristic silence over the past week. He knew Kana. He would not be worthy of wielding his kodachi if he didn't. Kana was the shinobi world's greatest swordsman ever. Kyuubi had told his host many stories and legends of the famous shinobi. Now he was telling Naruto to seek him out? "Why?" asked Naruto. Kyuubi growled in exasperation. "I can only teach you so much, you know," he explained. "I'm a fox demon, not a swordmaster. I want you to search him out. As you know, he has not been seen since about 15 years ago, just before you were born. You need to fully master your kodachi." "Oh, okay then," replied Naruto. He thought for a while. When should he leave? "Why not today?" suggested Kyuubi. "Today?" repeated Naruto thoughtfully. He pondered the idea before shrugging in acquiescence. He didn't have any missions, and his training was such that he could still do it whilst traveling, plus he hadn't left Kumogakure in 2 years. He knew no one from Konohagakure would recognize either him or his chakra signature. He had changed too much. So why not? "Okay, I'll go today, but I'll need to notify the Raikage," he replied to his demon. The blonde shinobi packed some rations in a scroll, along with extra clothing, weapons and medical items such as various antidotes and bandages. He didn't really need them, because of Kyuubi, but the demon had begun training his body to heal without the aid of Kyuubi's chakra, just in case, and it was always handy to have the bandages if someone else hurt themselves. Naruto sat down to a healthy breakfast of rice balls and fish. He had lost his obsessions with ramen sometime during the beginning of his growth spurt. Then made his way out of his house, and to the Raikage's tower, greeting some persons as he went, and keeping a wary eye out for rabid fangirls. It didn't take long to notify the Raikage, and 20 minutes later, Naruto was exiting the village gates. He nodded to the 2 Junin guarding the gates and began his trek into the borders to Omegakure no Sato, where Kana had passed through before going to Iwagakure, as rumored. Naruto calculated in his head. He didn't know where or if he was going to find the sword's master, but he would stop in Omegakure before Iwa to refresh himself, as the journey to Omegakure from Kumogakure was about 5 days long. The young shinobi traveled steadily for the rest of the day without any interruptions. He had seen a few shinobi, but none recognized him, and he made no threatening move towards them, so they passed in curious silence and all was well. Naruto made a detour off of the well-traveled road, going into the trees on the side of the road to set up camp. He needed to be alert if he was attacked, and sleep was essential. The shinobi made a small fire, took out his sleeping bag, and dropped into a blissful sleep as soon as his body relaxed. "Good night, Kyuubi," he addressed his demon inhabitant. "Night," replied Kyuubi vaguely. The sun's warmth on his body woke the sleeping Naruto. The blonde's blue eyes cracked open and he sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His body soon awakened, and Naruto folded the sleeping bag and secured it in its former position on his backpack. His breakfast was a quick affair, and he washed his face with a handful of water before shouldering his backpack and stretching. He was ready for his second day of travel. Naruto's blonde locks whipped about his face with the force of the wind as he sped noiselessly through the branches of trees, his booted feet barely leaving a trace as they touched down occasionally on each branch. As on the previous day, Naruto traveled for a lengthy period before seeing anyone. It was around midday before Naruto's sharp eyes caught sight of a group of ninja. "Ninja up ahead, Kyuubi," he told the demon. "Just greet them and be on your way," replied the fox. Naruto sent back a vague affirmative. His attention had been garnered by a kunoichi in the group ahead. It looked almost like one of his former Konohagakure acquaintances. Was it Ino? If it was Ino, then the group was most likely Team 10. The blonde shinobi's eyes flicked quickly over the ninja as he passed, nodding to Asuma as he went. His azure eyes rested on Ino briefly before Ino refocused on the path ahead and left them behind. Wow, was that Ino? He thought in surprise. She had obviously grown much stronger. He was surprised. He never thought Ino would become as strong as she obviously was now. She was also more beautiful, if that was possible. Naruto chuckled suddenly to himself. He bet Shikamaru was racking his brain for facts about him. He wasn't in the bingo book, he knew, and this would be the first time anyone outside Kumogakure would be seeing him. He hadn't left the village for 2 years. Have fun figuring me out, Shikamaru, thought Naruto amusedly, as he picked up his speed slightly. Little did he know, Shikamaru was indeed trying to figure him out. The Konoha group watched as the black-clad shinobi passed them at an almost inhuman speed, his figure rapidly diminishing in the distance before disappearing completely. Ino watched until she could see no more, and then turned to their team leader, Sarutobi Asuma. Asuma-sensei, who was that shinobi that just passed? She asked. Her sensei shrugged. I don't know, Ino, but he seemed to know us. Yeah, mumbled Shikamaru. And whoever he was extremely strong. Couldn't you feel it, Asuma-sensei? Their sensei nodded. Yes, Shikamaru. He was probably about 2 times stronger than myself. The 3 genin gaped. Asuma was an extremely strong shinobi. He had a bounty of 35 million ryo on his head. To be acknowledged as stronger than him, hell, 2 times stronger than him, was no small feat. Wow, said Choji in an odd tone, voicing their similar thoughts. I guess he really is strong. The team continued in silence, until Shikamaru addressed his team leader again. Asuma-sensei, did you see a Hite-8 anywhere on that shinobi? Their sensei pondered the question for a moment before attempting to answer. No, I didn't. Why? He queried his genius student. Well, I looked him up in the bingo book, because such an obviously strong shinobi would be wanted by someone, but I didn't see a thing. And then when I thought back to when we saw him, I noticed that his Hite-8 was nowhere in sight. Plus, we don't know either his facial features or his fighting style. In short, we know nothing at all about that shinobi, and that is dangerous, since he is so strong. Asuma listened to his student's logical explanation and then replied. You're right, Shikamaru, knowing nothing at all about such an obviously strong shinobi is dangerous. But, one thing I can say, he is not from Konoha. His chakra signature is not even remotely familiar. Shikamaru nodded, and then continued his query. Then why did he look at us as if he knew us? Their sensei shook his head. I don't know, Shikamaru, I don't know. A contemplative silence fell over the group as they traveled. Who was that shinobi and how did he know them? Naruto slowed his pace as he glimpsed the large iron-wrought gates of Omegakure no Sato. He would stop here for a night to refresh himself. The blonde shinobi signed the ninja register handed to him by the AIM Junin guarding the gates, and entered the busy village, mingling into the crowd easily. Naruto looked around. Now, where was a hotel to stay for the night? Or even an inn? He wasn't all that picky. His head swiveled from side to side as he walked amidst the throngs of passers-by, searching for a place to rest. Then his eyes lit on a comfortable-looking nin. Finally, he thought, slightly exasperated. Naruto walked into the inn and requested a single room. The pretty young woman at the desk gave him a starry-eyed look before handing him the key to his room and informing him of the price for a night's stay with entirely too much gusto. The blonde groaned. Not another fangirl, he thought, in mental anguish. Kyuubi chuckled, the sound reverberating in Naruto's mind. Guess you're just a babe magnet, huh kid? He asked amusedly. Naruto growled mentally and took the key from the starstruck girl, bestowing a drool-worthy smile on her before heading towards his designated room. He really couldn't wait to get some sleep. 5 days of traveling plus heavy training was no small feat, even for a Jinchuriki. Naruto entered the room noiselessly before shedding his backpack and shoes. Then he lay down on the comfortable futon and immediately felt himself beginning to drift off into sleep. Just before he succumbed to the blackness, he tried to memorize the inn's name for future reference. What was it? His frown cleared as his brain supplied him with the answer. Oasis of Rest. Asuma and Team 10 drew closer and closer to the gates of Omegakure, their steps unconsciously quickening at the thought of a warm futon and some rest. Konohagakure was always sunny and warm, and so the Konoha team was unused to the damp, cold, bleak climate that defined Omegakure no Sato. 5 days of barely interrupted traveling in unfamiliar climate had taken its toll on each ninja, and now all they wanted was to rest. Asuma signed the register, and each ninja followed suit, before the AIM Junin waved them through the gates. Once inside, Asuma began walking purposefully into the heart of the town, brushing shoulders with many passers-by in the crush of villagers. "Where are we going, Asuma-sensei?" shouted Choji over the noise of the villagers. Asuma shook his head at Choji and the large boy fell silent, understanding and heeding his sensei's warning to keep silent. He motioned for them to follow him, then took a sharp right turn and continued walking until he came to a halt in front of a comfortable-looking inn called the Oasis of Rest. "This is one of the best inns in Omegakure," announced Asuma. "Many ninjas stay here. Come, let's secure our rooms. Shikamaru and Choji, you two will share, whilst Ino and myself will have separate rooms." The preteen genin nodded in acceptance and understanding. With that said, Asuma led the way into the inn and over to the female receptionist. Giving Asuma a flirty glance and Ino a dark one, she spoke. "What can I do for you, sir?" Asuma mentally rolled his eyes. TCH. Fangirl, he thought. "I want 3 rooms, 2 with 1 bed each, and the third with 2 separate beds." "No problem," the girl assured him. Asuma signed the register and waited for her to tell him the total. "Here you go." She checked the register. "Asuma-san," she said, giving him the keys. "The price is 5,000 ryo." Asuma drew out his wallet and paid the woman, then distributed the keys amongst his students. Then they all ascended to their rooms for some much-needed rest. Naruto strapped his kodachi onto his back and picked up his backpack. "Alright, I'm just going to get some barbecue, then head out again for Iwagakure no Sato," he said to Kyubi. "Just don't take too long," cautioned Kyubi. "People, meaning other shinobi, are bound to notice you because of your strength, so you might be challenged or something like that. Be careful." "Uh-huh," replied Naruto, heading down the inn's stairs as he conversed with his demonic inhabitant. He signed the register again, ignoring the flirtatious gesture and coy, fluttering lashes of the fangirl receptionist. Then he left the inn and made his way to a barbecue stand he had seen the night before. Feeling ravenous and rather well rested, Naruto ordered 2 full plates of the excellent barbecue and devoured them with gusto. He exited the shop over an hour and a half later. As he entered the street, he espied the same team of Konoha genin and sensei that he had encountered at the beginning of his travels. Against his will, he found his eyes drawn to the blonde Ino. A feeling of intense sadness washed over him as he watched her laughing happily with her 2 teammates, Nara Shikamaru and Akamichi Choji. Naruto had never actually known them, apart from being aware of their names and which team they were on. Even though he had a crush on Ino, he didn't know her. He had never even really spoken to her. Naruto's eyes moved to the 2 boys. They, like him, had grown a lot. Akamichi Choji was even bigger, but the fat of his younger years had translated to pure muscle, and his large form drew many odd looks from passing females. His formerly short, rust-red hair had grown out, and now resembled his father's, its spiky length brushing the middle of his back. He also wielded a wooden staff. Something told Naruto that the wooden staff was not entirely as it seemed. His eyes shifted to Nara Shikamaru, and his eyes widened in shock. If not for the obvious youthfulness of his face, a lack of a beard, Naruto would have mistaken him for his father. A cigarette hung lazily from the corner of his mouth, and his body was relaxed, but Naruto knew that his piercing gray eyes were taking in everything around him. Naruto sighed, and his eyes returned to Ino. She was breathtakingly beautiful. The blonde male had harbored a crush on the Yamanaka ever since the first day at the academy. He still remembered it vividly. "Demon boy, don't come near me. I don't want to sit by you. Go to your seat, Uzumaki." The harsh, strident tones of Amino Iruka, his academy teacher, cut through the jeers and taunts of the young boy's tormentors. Pained azure eyes looked up at his teacher before the 8-year-old walked slowly to an empty seat at the center of the classroom. The seats around it were all deserted. No one wanted to sit near him, let alone beside him. Iruka's hard gaze followed him until he sat, then the teacher surveyed the classroom, his eyes softening as they landed on various students. "My name is Amino Iruka, and I will be your academy teacher until you graduate and become genin. Is that clear?" "Yes, sensei," chorused the class. Iruka nodded. "Alright, now be good. I have to deliver your student forms to the principal." The teacher left the classroom, closing the door behind him. As soon as he left, the jeers and taunts began again, all focused at Naruto. The girls giggled and whispered behind their hands, shooting him venomous glances every once in a while. One pink-haired girl was the meanest. "Demon boy, what are you doing in a classroom? Shouldn't you be off dying somewhere?" The class laughed heartily at her cruel words. Naruto's gaze met the pinkette's and moved away to the long-haired blonde beside her. She didn't look at him, instead, tugged on the pinkette's blouse, smiling triumphantly. "Sakura? Sakura?" Forehead, she yelled when Sakura ignored her. The pinkette turned away from tormenting Naruto and faced the other girl. "What?" she said aggressively. It didn't bother the blonde. She grinned even more. "Sasuke-kun looked at me. He likes me more than you." Sakura let out a shriek of fangirl fury and the two girls battled it out with insults until the other fangirls realized what they were arguing about and joined the disagreement, screaming about Sasuke-kun. Naruto couldn't tear his eyes away from the blonde. She was so pretty. Suddenly, she looked straight at him, and he flinched, ready to receive a cruel smirk and rude comment, but she smiled, a small, beautiful smile, and he realized. She had distracted Sakura from tormenting him. The small blonde boy smiled tentatively back and they both turned away before they were caught. Then Iruka came back, scowling at Naruto, and his hell of a life began again. But he never forgot Ino, or that moment. Naruto came back to the present. He sighed again. That was why he had had a crush on her for so long. But she didn't like him romantically, she didn't even notice him. Her attention was all on Sasuke-kun. The blonde shinobi looked back at the team. He had unconsciously followed them into a slightly seedy part of town. Then a cry rang out, and his eyes widened, and he shifted into full attack mode, becoming the dangerous shinobi he was. They had been attacked. 3 shinobi had accosted the team, one occupying both Shikamaru and Choji and the second, obviously the leader, Asuma. The third one had thrown a bucking Ino over his shoulder, bound her hands and ankles with chakra rope, and sped away. Naruto frowned. That shinobi was not getting away. Maybe if it was Sakura, but not Ino. Naruto left the shadows he had been in, and sped after the ninja, vaulting rooftops and walls as he pursued the kidnapper. Within minutes, he had caught up to the ninja. Ino's eyes widened as she recognized the shinobi pursuing them. It seemed that her kidnapper also realized, because he stopped and placed her on the ground behind him, drawing a kodachi. The other shinobi didn't hesitate at the sight of the kidnapper's weapon, instead, he drew out one of his own, and the two began to spar, kodachis clashing hard enough to create sparks. Ino took the chance to study her kidnapper and would-be savior. She looked at the kidnapper first. She might have to identify him if he was apprehended. His appearance was that of a missing nin. The first thing she noticed was his clothing and lack of hite-8, combined with his menacing aura. He had bright orange hair, and wore a blue wide-collared shirt, with blue arm warmers, knee-length loose pants with bandages calves and dark blue shinobi sandals. He wielded his sword expertly, but he was obviously no match for the other shinobi. Ino's gaze moved to the other ninja, recognition dawning in her eyes again. It was that same shinobi she saw on the way to a megacure, she was sure. He was hot. Bright, spiky blonde hair spilled over the sides of his face and down the nape of his neck, and a black silken cloth graced his forehead instead of a hite-8. She frowned slightly. Did that mean he was a missing nin? This was the second time she was seeing him, and she had yet to see any trace of a hite-8, even a scarred one. She continued to peruse the unknown shinobi. He wore a black cloak which fluttered every time he moved. A mesh undershirt just barely visible through the flaps of the cloak, black shinobi pants and a pair of obviously expensive leather shinobi boots. His hands were covered in black fingerless gloves and metal knuckles. The skin of his face was tanned, well, the small amounts that she could see, since he wore a face mask that covered everything except his azure eyes. Suddenly, she heard the sound of running footsteps behind her, and she tensed and spun, but relaxed when she saw the other members of her team. They all looked relieved to see her unhurt, but then looked shocked when they recognized the shinobi fighting her kidnapper. "Him again?" asked Choji in amazement. "Is that weird or what?" They murmured words of general agreement, and then Ino turned to Asuma. "Asuma-sensei, I have a feeling that he is a missing nin himself." Even now I haven't seen a Hite 8, and I got closer than before, Asuma nodded thoughtfully. He had come to that conclusion himself before. But there was still one question. How did he know them? Ino looked away from her sensei and refocused on the battle. She gaped. It was over? The kidnapper was lying on the ground bleeding profusely from a fatal wound. Her savior walked over to the team. Did you get any information on these shinobis' identities? He asked. Ino shuddered mentally. His voice was deep and smooth. Asuma nodded, and shifted his cigarette so he could speak clearly. That one is Fuso, the other two were Ito and Suigite. All missing nin from Iwagakure no Sato. B class. The stranger nodded and began to turn away, but Asuma's voice stopped him. Thank you. He paused, waiting for identification. The stranger half turned away before filling in the blank. Akuma Hiei. You are welcome. Then he walked away at a sedate pace, quickly blending into the crowd of villagers who had gathered at the scene, leaving them to look after him in puzzlement. Asuma looked at the three genin. Well, are we ready to leave? They nodded, and Team 10 set out for Iwagakure. They had a mission there, to protect the daimyo. It was a B-class mission, and the sooner they got there, the better. Naruto's tense body relaxed as he disappeared into the crowd of excited villagers. He let a grim smile spread across his masked face at the thought of the dead shinobi who had attempted to kidnap Ino. It disappeared, however, when he realized how stupid he had been. Kuso. He cursed mentally. Now Asuma's curious about me. I bet the next bingo book will have an Akuma Hiei in it. Exactly, Kit, said Kyuubi wryly. At least they didn't recognize you. But they are curious as to how you seem to know them. Naruto cursed again. He was so stupid. The blonde's body tensed again when a shinobi suddenly appeared in front of him. The daimyo would like to see you, Shinobi-san, he related politely. Naruto mentally groaned. What was it with him and daimyos? Wordlessly, he followed the shinobi messenger to the daimyo's office. The daimyo met him at the door. Come in, he paused, realizing that he had no name for the shinobi that stood before him. Akuma Hiei, filled in Naruto. The daimyo nodded. Come in, Akuma-san. Naruto followed the man into the comfortable office, sitting down on one of the many embroidered chairs in the room. After settling himself, the daimyo began. I would like to reward you, Akuma-san, he began. Naruto's eyes grew more alert, and he scanned the daimyo. He didn't seem like a threat. The daimyo was obviously a former shinobi gone to seed. He wore civilian's clothing under his green robes. He was of average height, and slightly pudgy. His short black hair was neatly cut, and a small black beard was on his chin. Piercing blue eyes stared at Naruto. My name is Garaki Naro. Naruto nodded, noticing a piercing on his left ear. Maybe he should get one. He considered it more seriously. He would get one. Pay attention, yelled Kyuubi from inside Naruto's mindscape. Naruto refocused and began to listen. They were shinobi that plagued this village for 5 years. We hired countless shinobi to kill them, but they never ever survived against them. That is why I wish to give you this. The daimyo held out a medium-sized scroll. Naruto reached out and took it, looking at it with slight suspicion. You can open it, said Kyuubi. They don't know you're a Jinchuriki, so anything that might be dangerous to a normal person would not affect you. Naruto deftly opened the scroll, and his eyes widened. The daimyo smiled. Yes, it is the summoning contract for ravens. It has not been used since the death of my brother, the famous Raven Ryu. Naruto began to hand it back, but the daimyo stopped him. No, keep it. I understand that you are a missing nin, but I have powers of intuition, a gift I was born with. I can feel that you are not the usual missing nin. Take it. Naruto reluctantly put the scroll in his backpack. Then he and the daimyo rose to their feet. Naruto bowed. Arigato gozaimasu, Garaki-san. The daimyo smiled in response. You are welcome. The two men walked to the door of the building, and the daimyo saw the blonde out the door. Naruto walked down the street, looking for a certain place. The blonde walked from street to street, until he found the place he was looking for. He glanced up at the sign and nodded in satisfaction. Shinobi Piercings. That was the name of the shop. He stepped inside, blinding as his eyes refocused in the darker interior of the shop. A young woman came out from the back of the shop and smiled brightly at him, fangirl sparkles fully activated. Yes, sir? She asked, eager to help the handsome male standing before her. My name is Akuma Hiei. I would like 2 piercings on my right ear. The girl busily wrote down his name and specification, and then looked up. What kind of piercings, Akuma-san? Naruto thought for a while, and then decided. 2 small hoops. The female nodded, and then gestured to the room she had exited earlier. Come, Akuma-san, our piercer is behind here. Naruto followed the girl behind the counter and into a white room. It was clearly very sanitary. All the piercing tools shone and glimmered in the sunlight from the window and the light bulb on the ceiling. A man, dressed similarly to a medic in a long white coat and pants, was standing by the only chair in the room. He bowed slightly to Naruto. My name is Kusaka. You're to be pierced, correct? Hi, Naruto replied in the affirmative. The girl gave Kusaka the paper she had been writing on and exited the room quietly. Kusaka read the paper and then motioned for Naruto to sit on the chair. This paper says you would like 2 small hoops on your right ear? Naruto nodded in answer, and Kusaka smiled. Well then, let's begin. The piercer made Naruto lean to his left, exposing his ear. Then he attacked a small iron hoop onto the piercing machine he held in his hands and brought it to the rim of Naruto's ear. The shinobi braced himself for the pain. Since the hole had to stay, Kyuubi could not heal it, and so he would have to bear the pain. He heard the sound of the machine being clicked into place, and then suddenly felt an awful stinging sensation on his ear, twice. The blonde flinched, and then relaxed as the piercer's presence withdrew. Finished, said Kusaka brightly. You were a brave one, I must say. Take a look. He turned the chair, angling the blonde's head slightly, so Naruto could see his newly pierced organ. A smile spread over Naruto's masked face, and his eyes crinkled, a telltale sign of his pleasure. He straightened his head, and a lock of sun-kissed hair fell onto his ear, partially obscuring the piercing. He nodded mentally. Good, one less thing to identify him. Arigato gozaimasu, Kusaka-san, he said to the piercer, handing him 1,000 ryo. I like it very much. No problem, beamed Kusaka. You can just go through the same door you came in. Naruto nodded and exited the stark white room. When the receptionist saw Naruto and his new piercing, she turned a cherry red. Kyuubi snickered, and Naruto stared. The fangirls seemed to like the piercing, the demon fox snickered. Naruto growled. Shut up. He returned his attention to the fangirl. She had not yet recovered. Naruto looked at her incredulously, and then left the piercers, picking up speed as he vaulted from rooftop to rooftop. He was leaving Omegakure no Sato now. He had delayed too much. The shinobi passed through the large iron wrought gates and began to move faster, running at an almost inhuman pace. He had to get a start on his travels. Naruto sped through the trees, conversing with Kyuubi as he went. The wind rushed through his unruly sun-kissed locks and buffeted his still slightly sore ear, as he leapt from branch to branch. The young shinobi had been traveling for 4 days non-stop now, ever since he left Omegakure. Just like before, he encountered shinobi, but passed then without incident in the first 3 days of his travels. But he had yet to see any human being for today. Naruto swiftly considered his current strength. He was beginning to tire. He had not slept for 3 days running. He should probably stop and rest. Damn right, interjected Kyuubi. Oh, shut up, retorted Naruto rudely. The shinobi espied a small clearing to the right, and he slowed down enough to turn and land in the center of the clearing. It was perfect. A line of shrubs prevented him from being seen easily from any direction. Naruto squatted on the hard ground and rested his backpack and kodachi in front of him. This would be the perfect time to work on his chakra separation seal, and maybe even the Hiraishin no Jutsu. Kyuubi suddenly spoke up. You should contact the leader of the ravens from the contract the AIM daimyo gave you. He recommended. And, while you're at it, I also have one for you. This will summon foxes. I will have to help you create it. This is the first time that any shinobi will have the power to summon foxes. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise. How come? He questioned. Well, I am the king of the Biju, and thus I would need someone worthy to be out-summons. Also, foxes are reclusive animals, and so shinobi would not come into contact with them enough to even consider a summoning contract with them. And, especially in Konoha, foxes are not liked. Ah, I see, replied Naruto. He drew out a large, blank scroll in his reed pen. Kyuubi, are you ready to create the summoning contract? Yes, replied the demon. You don't need the pen, except to sign your name. Just focus some of my chakra to your palm and place your palm on the scroll. That should automatically create the summoning contract needed. Naruto did as Kyuubi had ordered and nodded in satisfaction when the familiar terms of a summoning contract appeared on the scroll. Then he took the red pen and signed his name with a flourish, then cut his dominant hand, in the case, his right hand, and smeared the blood all over it, before making the print directly under his signature. Without preamble, he focused some of his chakra to the palm of his hand, before making a few hand seals and slamming it into the ground next to him. With a sudden poof, Naruto found himself facing a huge paw. He followed the leg attached to the paw to see a huge jaw. It was a gigantic fox, as big as a small mountain. He is my first subordinate, informed Kyuubi. The huge fox looked down at Naruto in some surprise. How did you summon me? Have you a summoning contract, and how did you get it? Tell me. There was definite anger in the deep, gruff voice. Let me speak, requested Kyuubi. Sure, replied Naruto. He concentrated and touched Kyuubi's chakra, bringing it to the forefront of his consciousness. Kyuubi took over. Naruto's eyes closed and reopened. When they flashed back open, they were blood red with slit pupils. Kyuubi, Naruto jumped into a tree opposite the fox and sat down. Who are you? Rumbled the fox again. I am the Kyuubi no Kitsune, king of the Biju and inhabitant of this human, Uzumaki Naruto. The fox's eyes widened in shock and surprise. Forgive me, Kyuubi-sama. I was not aware that the boy was your host. I suppose you provided him with the contract? Kyuubi nodded Naruto's head. Correct, Mandara. This is the first time for us foxes, is it not? But I have deemed this human worthy of our summons. Please send my greetings to my subordinates. This body is weak, and cannot tolerate my demonic presence. Yes, Kyuubi-sama, said Mandara. The huge black fox waited until Naruto repossessed his body, then spoke. Uzumaki Naruto, you are our first summons. We Kitsune are incredibly loyal creature, and because of your connection to Kyuubi-sama, we are bound to you for life. Please feel free to summon any one of us if you should need us. Thank you, Mandara, Naruto said to the black fox. I shall endeavor to do my best in regards to your summons. The fox inclined his head slightly, and then poofed away. Thanks, Kyuubi, Naruto said to his inhabitant. No problem, replied the demon. Use the raven's contract now. Naruto drew out the other large scroll. Unfurling it, he placed it on the ground, picked up his reed pen and signed his name under the only other summons there. Ryu, or Raven Ryu. Then used his blood again to make a handprint below his signature. The daimyo had told the truth. The scroll had not been used since the death of his brother. Again, Naruto made the appropriate hand seals before focusing a large amount of chakra to his hand and slamming it into the ground, thinking of a raven as he did so. Just as before, a poof was heard, and he found himself face to face with a great specimen of the raven he had thought of whilst summoning. What dost thou want with myself, human? Asked the huge bird in a slightly croaky voice. His yellow eyes focused on Naruto, and it sniffed the air in disdain. The air dost reek of fox. Art thou my summons? Yes, replied Naruto. As you might know, Ryu, your previous summons, is dead, has been for at least 10 years. This contract was entrusted to his brother, who in turn gave it to me. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, former Konohagakure shinobi. The raven looked at Naruto with new respect. So that is the reason why I have not seen Ryu for so long, it commented, then continued. Uzumaki Naruto, thou art the current summons. Use our services well. My name is Karen, and I am the leader of ravens. Naruto bowed. Thank you for your acceptance, Karen-san. I will endeavor to be as good a summons as possible. The raven looked at Naruto through beady eyes and ruffled midnight feathers slightly, and then nodded, as if satisfied, and poofed away. Naruto collapsed to the ground. Wow, that really depleted my chakra supply, he said to Kyuubi. Well, that is to be expected, said Kyuubi in reply. You are lucky to be still conscious, let alone with chakra left. Most shinobi would have fainted by now. The demon paused, then continued. I want to add something to your training. Gather chakra to your feet, just as if you were about to walk on water, and attempt to walk in the air. It may help you if you circulate the chakra on the soles of your feet. This will be hard, but not too hard, as you are already wind-natured. When you are able to stand, try to walk. Naruto sighed. His training was already rigorous, now this? However, he did as he was told, and began pushing chakra to his feet, circulating it as Kyuubi suggested. To his surprise, he almost immediately began rising in the air. I did it, he said to Kyuubi. The demon grunted in approval. Very good, although it will be easier for you now that your chakra stores have depleted, there is less to control. Now, try walking. Naruto focused again, and put one foot before the other, taking a tentative step. When he remained steady, he took another step, and another, until he was walking normally. Then he stopped to talk to Kyuubi, but when he stopped, he lost concentration and began sinking back to the ground. Kyuubi chuckled. Don't worry, you will practice walking and standing using your wind chakra until it becomes second nature and feels more natural than walking on the ground. Oh, and I want you to increase your gravity seals by 50 pounds each. Naruto groaned. 50 pounds each, that was an extra 200 pounds, and added to his current 900 pounds, would make a total of 1100 pounds. He adjusted the weights as he was told, and then did a few exercises to get his body adjusted to the extra weight. Naruto drew out a kunai and threw it at a random tree. His aim was perfect, and the speed of his throw was just a little slower than was normal for him. Then he sprang into motion, kicking the tree with one foot first, then the other. He nodded in satisfaction. His body had become somewhat accustomed to the weights. Naruto returned to his backpack and rested his body on the ground. He packed up the scrolls and reed pen before casting a genjutsu over the area so he could rest without the risk of being discovered. He needed the rest, especially after those 2 summons and the air exercise. Naruto slowed down as the terrain changed to a rocky, mountainous slope. It was harder to air-walk when there were so many rocks, and so he had been forced to wrap his entire body in chakra and rotate it, so his air-walking depended solely on the air around him and not the type of ground below. He was nearing Iwagakure no Sato. The blonde shinobi leapt nimbly from rock to rock, discarding the air-walking technique and swiftly ascending the mountain. He had heard that Kana was somewhere in these remote mountains. Naruto suddenly stopped. Somewhere was the key word. There was no way he could possibly search out all parts of the mountains and still find Kana in this lifetime. It was impossible. A thought occurred to him, and he smiled. Focusing chakra into his right palm, he slammed it into the ground, focusing on a raven in his mind. Immediately, a medium-sized raven stood before him. The black bird inclined its head, surveying Naruto from out of its beady eyes. "What dost thou wish thy humble servant Taka to do, master?" asked the raven. "Taka, I wish you to search these mountains for the swordsman named Kana. You may call on other ravens of your acquaintance if you wish. I shall be right here when you have finished." The raven ruffled its feathers and bowed his head. "Understood, Uzumaki-sama." A small poof was heard, and Taka turned to the raven beside him. "Olga, Taka." The 2 ravens greeted each other, and then Taka turned back to Naruto. "This is Olga. She will be aiding me in my task, Uzumaki-sama." Naruto nodded in comprehension. "Nice to meet you, Olga. You may go." The 2 ravens flew off instantly in a flutter of Stygian wings, disappearing rapidly from sight. Naruto turned his attention to his other task and began refocusing chakra to his hand. Then he repeated the earlier process, thinking of a fox as he did so. Sure enough, a small black fox appeared with a poof. Naruto looked at the 2 foxes. "What are your names?" he queried. The black fox stepped forward. "I am called Arashi, Uzumaki-sama." The other one stepped forward also. "And I am called Kazama." Naruto nodded, and then spoke. "Arashi, Kazama, there is a swordsman, a human named Kana, living somewhere in these mountains. Please see if you can find him. I will be waiting right here for you." The foxes nodded in unison. "Hi, Uzumaki-sama," they chorused, before loping away, noses to the ground. Naruto climbed a bit further up the slope to a flatter place, and then squatted down, drawing out the chakra separation seal. An idea had just come to him, and he needed to get it down. The blonde surveyed the scroll with satisfaction and a strong sense of achievement. The scroll was halfway finished. He could hardly wait until he completed it. It would be his magnum opus, his masterpiece. The shinobi worked for hours, until the midday sun shone hotly down on the lone figure. Then a raven and a fox simultaneously appeared in front of him. They looked at each other, and then turned back to Naruto. I have found him, stated Arashi. Myself also, added Taka. Naruto thanked them, and then asked them to lead him to the swordsman. It was time. The blonde absent-mindedly followed his two summons through the rocky terrain, noticing vaguely that his surroundings were becoming more and more remote, as if the swordsman's location was a great deal off from civilization. Naruto was broken from his musings when the fox in front of him halted. The preteen looked up, only to see a black-clothed man standing in front of him. He had only time to think Kuso, and then the stranger flew at him, long black hair fluttering behind him. Then, in a flash, his opponent drew a shiny, double-edged kodachi, and he knew. This man was Kana. Naruto quickly drew his own kodachi, and began countering the other's thrusts, and even going so far as to endeavor to thrust at his opponent, choosing to switch from defensive to offensive. The two males fought for at least 5 minutes, thrusting and parrying at lightning speeds. Naruto felt exhilarated. He was at home, wielding his kodachi. But his body was beginning to tire. He could not keep this up for much longer. Just as the thought crossed his mind, his attacker leapt back lightly, balancing with precise grace on the balls of his feet. Then he bowed. Naruto, panting slightly, could only stare in confusion at the other man. What? His opponent spoke, effectively drawing his attention from his baffled thoughts. Congratulations. His voice was deep, and held a slight note of amusement. Naruto stood. Congratulations? He repeated in his mind, incredulous. Then a burst of laughter issued from his lips, noticeably startling the other. The Jinchuriki laughed for a full 30 seconds before managing to control himself. Meeting the other's eyes, he grinned. Sorry, but to say, congratulations, after you attacked me with such ferocity is absurd. May I ask why you congratulate me? I already know your identity. The man raised an eyebrow, his surprised look replaced by one of slight curiosity. Oh, and who might I be? Naruto's eyes narrowed imperceptibly as he answered in a serious tone. Kana, the greatest of swordsmen in the shinobi world. Kana let a self-deprecatory smile cross his face. The young boy was indeed smart. He already knew what he was here for, but he didn't know the other's name. And why did you congratulate me? Queried Naruto patiently. Kana smiled. I was congratulating you on being able to withstand my attack for more than 5 minutes, even though you were obviously a beginner. You must be quite ardent and exceptional at handling your kodachi. Naruto smiled. Training so long and hard had paid off. Yes, he replied. However, I know that I am nowhere near exceptional, and I do not know the identity of my kodachi, which is why I am here. And my name is Uzumaki Naruto, former Leaf Genin, currently a C-class missing nin. Kana raised an eyebrow. You are not a C-class missing nin, he commented. Your latent strength should at least give you a B-class status. So either the bingo book has not yet been updated, or you have been lying low for the past year. Naruto smiled enigmatically, his eyes crinkling above his mask. So what do you say, Kana-san? He queried. Will you teach me, or will you refuse? Kana already knew his answer. Turning away, he threw the words over his shoulder. Come, you will be a master of your kodachi, legendary thing that it is. And thus began Naruto's training with the legendary Kana. Asterisk 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 Naruto sat, panting, underneath the shade of a convenient tree in Kana's private training grounds. His rapid breaths unconsciously slowed as he let his mind revert in time to the beginning of his training, when Kana had made him aware as to his kodachi's history and identity. Kana had told him of a kodachi wielded by a shinobi called Demora Sume during the First Great Shinobi War. The kodachi, Shin, was famous for its double-edged blade, The blade had two edges. A white edge that drained chakra, and a black edge that looked somewhat like blackfire and was fatal to whoever it cut. The katana had disappeared on the battlefield. When Demura's body was found, the Kodachi was nowhere to be seen, and had not been found for centuries, and had almost become a myth. However, the katana had one quirk: it chose its wielder. The person who it chose as its wielder would see it in all its glory, and other persons would only see a normal Kodachi until its true wielder grasped it. Then it would reveal its true double-edged form. It had chosen Naruto. Naruto was the chosen wielder of Shin. Not even Kana himself could wield Shin. It had been about a year and a half now, and he had completed the Hiraishin no Jutsu and air manipulating technique, and 3/4 of the chakra separation seal, plus mastering some other, simpler jutsu. He could remember Kana's tone as clearly as if they were conversing right now. Naruto, Kana began in a mysterious tone that Naruto would quickly come to recognize as reluctant admiration. You impressed me greatly with your mastery of Shin when we met. Frankly, for someone your age, mastery of a Kodachi, and one that great, at that level would be regarded as the work of a prodigy. The blonde smiled in recollection of the elation and gratitude that had filled his chest, giving him a buoyant feeling. It was the first time someone had complimented him on the results of his hard work. He returned to his memory. Because of this, Kana continued, I will endeavor to train you, and make you into the greatest of all swordsmen, greater than even myself. You have the potential, he continued, seeing Naruto's incredulous eyes. When I was your age, I was nowhere as proficient. A distant voice, rather urgent in tone, broke Naruto out of his musings. He focused on the voice. It was Kyuubi. What was he saying? Kana is calling you, Naruto. The fox sounded exasperated. Naruto nodded, heading back to the present world. His sensei was probably ready to spar again. Naruto blinked azure eyes, looking up at his teacher. I assume we are ready to begin again? He queried, grinning slightly, although this was only shown by a crinkling of his eyes. Kana smiled and nodded in reply. Yes, Naruto. He rumbled. We are going to test your proficiency on the sword moves we have gone through previously. Do not let me down. The blonde preteen jumped to his feet, his whole frame radiating eagerness. Of course I won't let you down, Kana-sensei, he replied quietly, reassuringly. I think I might even surprise you. Kana said nothing in reply, but knew very well that it might indeed be the case. Actually, Naruto had been surprising him from their first encounter, especially when he found out the boy's true age. Returning to the present, Kana got into a fighting stance and readied himself for the staggering attack he knew was sure to come. What attack would he use first? His question was soon answered. Naruto charged forward gracefully, his pliant body flexing with the strangely feline run he had adopted since coming to train with Kana. Odori no Rasen Tasuki. Kana smiled to himself. He had had a feeling that the blonde would attack with this particular style first. It was one of his favorites. Naruto flew at his teacher and the two males began an intricate sword dance, their respective katana flying through the air at speeds so high only a dojutsu similar to the Sharingan could follow it. Within 20 minutes, they had completed the sword dance, thrusting and parrying like true masters of the sword. Then Naruto switched dances. Odori no Suiraku Tasuki. The two opponents subtly shifted stances, and the intricately beautiful dance began again. This one was more elaborate than the previous dance, having more sword flourishes and footwork. Kana was, to say the least, impressed. This dance was the hardest of all he had taught Naruto, and the young blonde had mastered it. With a few years of experience under his belt, he would easily surpass Kana. His eyes widened slightly. They had already completed the dance, and now Naruto was switching again. Yugure Ketata Meshikiba. Kana was forced to go on the defensive as his student began the aggressive swordplay, jabbing and thrusting with obvious deadly strength. The teacher stumbled slightly at the end of a particularly vicious thrust, his strong arms vibrating a bit from the tremors passing through their respective katanas from the force of the thrust and parry. The two shinobi continued to fight in the same aggressive, slightly animalistic style, Naruto occasionally reverting to a defensive position when his teacher made a particularly quick, ferocious thrust. Exhilaration ran through their bodies, their chakras shifting and molding like the dance they were currently utilizing. Then Naruto changed his stance again. Odori no Shoshi Gufu. The dance shifted, and became gentler, but the speed increased, befitting the tornado name. The speed of their moves increased until their hands and katanas were a blur, like an actual tornado. Kana smiled grimly as he parried blows from Naruto's katana. His student was a formidable foe. The dance went on for a few more minutes, and then changed again. The duo went through 2 more dances, Odori no Heike Tasuki and Odori no Jugen, before Naruto shifted into a stance that Kana was entirely unfamiliar with. His student grinned triumphantly under his mask at his sensei's surprise before crying out, "Akuma no Odori no Uzumaki." The teacher was forced to call on every tactic he knew or owned to counter the whirlwind barrage of attacks pressing in on him from all directions. He could only watch and wonder as his student proceeded to thoroughly amaze him with his proficiency. He had never seen this dance before. It must be something that Naruto created, and the surprise he mentioned earlier. Kana's eyes widened even more as once again, Naruto shifted into another unfamiliar stance. "Odori no Gogyu Tasuki," cried Naruto, lunging forward and beginning an even more elaborate dance than the Odori no Suiraku Tasuki. This one was more graceful, a true dance speaking of a fiery passion coming from one's heart and consuming the moon in its flaming arms. A dance born out of despair and triumph over depression. A dance reflecting his student's soul. The blonde mention came to a slow halt, his chest heaving slightly. His eyes crinkled as he took a look at his sensei's utterly blown-away expression. The two shinobi straightened and looked each other in the eye, clam azure blue meeting fathomless black ones, before Kana sank into a low bow. "I hereby acknowledge you as my superior, Uzumaki Naruto. You have surpassed me, Kana, and I am no longer worthy of being your teacher. Now we are comrades, one of whom is both the younger and the greater. I bid you goodbye and good luck in the world of shinobi." Kana straightened and embraced his student in fatherly pride. It was true. Naruto's personality had endeared him to Kana, and the blonde became the son he had never had. "Arigato, Kana-sensei," said Naruto quietly, releasing his foster father and closest friend, and former teacher. No more was said. Naruto packed his possessions and the two males rested before Naruto hoisted his backpack for the first time in a year and a half, ready to leave. With a wave and a poof, Naruto had left the mountain, and in a matter of seconds, reappeared in front of Iwagakure no Sato's main gates with a strong gust of wind. The blonde turned away from the gate and began the long trek back to Kumogakure. He was in no hurry. Besides, if he hurried, it would still take him all of 3 weeks, instead of the usual month. So he had absolutely no real reason to hurry. During the next 2 weeks, Naruto completed the chakra separation seal, and now a small crimson fox rode on his shoulders as he sped through the trees and other foliage. Kyuubi had opted for an animal form rather than a human one as it would raise too many questions, and Naruto had placed an expert genjutsu on the fox to reduce him from the size of a horse down to a normal pup. The story would be that Naruto had encountered a dying mother fox on his way from Iwagakure on Sato and stopped to help her, when he had seen the small pup peeking out from under her mutilated and dying body. He had been unable to save the mother and adopted the pup, naming him Tenchi. Kyuubi, Tenchi still had a normal mental link with the Jinchuriki, because of the bite, tattoo that he had given his host, and the fact that Kyuubi was still bound to Naruto by the seal. But Naruto would still understand him if he chose to communicate by barks or yips. The two had begun to learn how to fight together if needed. It was easy, since Kyuubi already had knowledge of fighting in kitsune form, and Naruto himself already knew how foxes fought, due to Kyuubi's prior training. Naruto slowed down, spotting a clearing to his left. "Kyuubi, I am going to stop and rest, maybe even train for about a day." "Good idea," the fox on his shoulder replied through their mental link. The preteen turned into the clearing, landing solidly on his feet as he halted in its center. The Jinchuriki rested his backpack a few feet away and proceeded to make several hand seals. Another thing he had learned in the 2 weeks since he had left was the nature of his second chakra element, Suiden. He was not even nearly proficient in this element yet. He had just completed the Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu, a water clone, and had begun the Suiden Daitopa, a jutsu that, when perfectly executed, would flood a large area with water. He was nowhere near covering the area required for full mastery of the technique. He could only cover about 100 meters with water. Naruto practiced for about 3 hours, and then collapsed beside an observing Kyuubi and his backpack for some well-deserved rest. It was an unspoken arrangement between Fox and Master, and then when Naruto slept, Kyuubi would take watch duty. A few hours later, when the sun had begun to set over the forest trees and the twittering of homebound birds flying overhead filled the trees, Naruto awoke slowly, blearily rubbing at his sleepy eyes. Naruto quickly consumed some ninja rations, and the comrades were again ready for travel. Naruto entered Kumogakure no Sato for the second time in his entire life, noticing the respectful look sent his way. Kyuubi, on his shoulder, chuckled mentally. They must have gotten the new issue of the bingo book, he commented. Naruto grinned a feral grin under his mask. A week ago, 2 S-class nuke nin had been brutally, effortlessly slaughtered by an Akuma Hiei, in the space of a few minutes. Both shinobi had been former Akatsuki members, and were on the run from said organization. They had foolishly attempted to ambush Naruto, and met their demise at the end of a well-placed Shin thrust. Naruto flipped open his old bingo book, automatically reaching the page both ninja were listed on. "Ah," he murmured in satisfaction as his eyes landed on their profiles. The first one was called Nagoma. Naruto stared at the photo, memories flooding his brain. Nagoma was quite handsome. Short, shoulder-length blonde hair was slicked down and combed straight back. His green eyes were deceptive. They held the power of seduction, disguising the fact that he was a powerful killer. It was those same green eyes that Naruto had pierced with Shin, and the same green eyes that had seduced numerous female civilians and kunoichi alike, giving him the reputation as a ladies' man. Nagoma wore a black knee-length coat, similar to Naruto, standard black pants, a mesh undershirt, and like all other Akatsuki had painted his nails a dark color, in this case dark green. Naruto's eyes moved to Gattaga's profile. He had been the weaker of the two, not that one would easily deduce this from his hardcore appearance. Gattaga almost resembled an advertisement for a piercers, so riddled was his face with various piercings. His nose bridge had 5 bars through it, and each ear was ringed with about 18 hoop piercings. His tongue was also pierced with 2 studs, side by side, and his thin lip had 3 small hoops on the left side of his lower lip. Gattaga wore a black turtleneck, and long, tight black pants with bandaged arms and carried a kodachi. His hair was a blue-black shade, and was in a short, spiky style actually very similar to Naruto's. An almost malicious gleam entered Naruto's eyes as he recollected the thrill and satisfaction he had gotten by fighting Gattaga. The nuke nin had actually been rather skilled with a kodachi, but of course, was no match for Naruto. He put away the older version of the bingo book and flipped open the newer version. "Let's see what they have on me, just for kicks," he said to Kyuubi. The fox let out a small bark of laughter, and the pair began to peruse Naruto's profile. "Let's see," muttered Naruto vaguely. It seemed that they were puzzled as to his identity. All they had was his general description, mentioning that he apparently was a missing nin from an unknown village, and wore a mask that obscured his features, and his status as an S-class nin. They also had estimated levels of his various strengths. His taijutsu, kenjutsu and ninjutsu levels were estimated to be at kage level. However, his genjutsu was only at high chunin. He gaped when he saw his bounty. 45 million ryo? He screamed mentally in utter shock. That was quite a hefty sum. The Otto nin must want him badly to put up so much. Well, if Naruto had his way, he would be making sure that no one would be collecting that money anytime soon. Right now, he had to replenish his ninja ration supply and get some kunai custom made for his Hiraishin technique. No one, not even Kana, knew he had even created or completed the technique. "Father, son," muttered Kyuubi again on his shoulder, the words coming out like a series of barks, growls and yips to the average ninja. Naruto frowned slightly. This was the second time he had heard Kyuubi muttering something about father and son in conjunction to his Hiraishin technique. What did the Kitsune demon mean? "Father, son?" he asked Kyuubi. The fox simply grunted in reply, and Naruto knew that the demon wasn't about to tell him. Well, at least not for now. The Jinchuriki shrugged. He had more important issues to attend to. Like, getting something to eat. Naruto sighed. It seemed that even though he avoided all things Konoha, it always found him in one way or another. The Jinchuriki's gaze roamed over the 4 Konoha ninja standing in front of him, assessing them, even as they assessed him, their eyes lingering on the small red fox on his shoulder. He had attempted to pass without incident, but they confronted him, and here he was, wondering how to get out of this mess without a fight. Naruto looked back at the ninja quartet, groaning mentally as he recognized them from the bingo book in vague memories of Konoha. Why did he have to meet this team? Hitaki Kakashi, the renowned copy ninja, Sarutobi Asuma, Nara Shikaku, and Mitarashi Anko. His eyes lingered on the Kumoichi, taking her appearance in, she was the most unfamiliar to him. The Kunoichi was scantily dressed. She wore a full mesh bodysuit, and over that a dark orange skirt and an olive green trench coat that did little to preserve the minuscule amounts of modest she had left. Naruto scrutinized the Nara next. He looked exactly like Shikamaru, except an older, bearded version. The blonde's brow furrowed in puzzlement. Wasn't Nara Shikaku part of the famous Ino Shikacho trio? Then, what was he doing in another team? The preteen's gaze moved to Sarutobi Asuma, and he nodded courteously to the older shinobi, seeing his teammates' surprised expressions. Asuma apparently had not broadcasted the news that he had met Akuma Hiei. A voice drew Naruto from his speculation. Not going to attack? If you won't, we will. It was Mitarashi Anko. When Naruto merely looked at her, expressionless, the team looked at each other, and Asuma leapt forward, slashing at Naruto with his trench knives. A thrill shot through the preteen, and he quickly unsheathed his kodachi, Shin, running a sharp line of chakra along it. The kodachi responded in its usual fashion to its wielder, morphing from a normal double-edged katana to a bicolored, double-edged lethal weapon. The blade extended a few inches, the guard became black snakeskin leather, and the pommel glowed blue. Naruto grinned. Swordplay was his forte. But he would have to watch out for the Nara. Naruto looked quickly around. Too many trees, he thought. In a flash the Jinchuriki made a few hand signs, his hands going fast enough to be seen by the normal eye as a blur. Fuiten. Daitopa, he called. Immediately, a huge gust of wind swept through the forested area, felling the trees and sweeping them far away from the battle scene. And just in time, as the trees fell and blew away, Naruto could see the Nara's shadow quickly retreat. He looked back at Asuma. This had to end now. It was now or never. I'm going to use one of the jutsu you taught me, he told Kyuubi through their mental link. The fox on his shoulders shifted and Naruto felt Kyuubi growl in response. Naruto focused on the battle and slipped into one of the many dances Kana taught him, quickly overpowering Asuma. Naruto's hands flew into another series of hand seals and he cried. Kokwangyo no jutsu. Immediately, Asuma stood still, and Naruto seized the chance, leaping like an acrobat over the shinobi, kodachi outstretched. He landed lightly on his feet, looking warily at the 3 remaining opponents. Kakashi, his distinctive gravity-defying silver hair glinting in the sunlight, stepped forward. What did you do to him? He asked, gesturing at Asuma. Naruto's eyes crinkled above his mask, telling Kakashi that he was either laughing or smiling. But Naruto remained silent. He calculated the time he had given Asuma to cancel the genjutsu. He wouldn't underestimate him. It was almost up. That meant that he had to defeat 3 Junin-level opponents in 10 minutes. The blonde frowned. Hireishin. It was his only chance. He would shunshin around the field, and mix in a Hireishin. He gave a decisive nod, and before any of his opponents could move, flashed around the battlefield. Then, as he neared the Nara, he used Hireishin, thanking Kami that he had thrown the Hireishin kunai earlier. His Hireishin technique was his other masterpiece. Naruto had put a complex chakra storage seal on each special seal-absorbent kunai, and filled it with his chakra, so that the seal would recognize the chakra signature. So when he threw the kunai, the seal would seem to shine brightly at him, and all he had to do was let the chakra in the special seal tug on his chakra. At first, he had instinctively resisted the tug, and the technique had failed. But when he allowed himself to be controlled by the tug of the kunai he focused on, he felt his body drawn into something that looked vaguely like a yellow tunnel. It was only after he did it for the first time that he realized that he was basically seeing his own afterimage in front of him. That is, his brain had already reached the point, but his body had not. The persons outside would not see him, as the yellow tunnel was purely mental. He had figured out that the yellow was purely his hair color after dyeing his hair red. The tunnel had turned red. In the tunnel, everything became slower. In short, a shinobi using Shunshin looked as if he were merely jogging from one spot to another. The Hiraishin was undefeatable. Plus, if ever he died, and the kunai were found, there was a special part of the seal that released the chakra stored there, so that someone else besides him could use it. His legacy could be passed down. Naruto could see the Nara through the translucent sides of the yellow Hiraishin tunnel. The Jinchuriki quickly knocked him unconscious using the guard of his Kodachi as he passed his opponents faster than even Kakashi's Sharingan could see. "Wait, Sharingan, Kyuubi, he'll realize I'm a Jinchuriki," he said, panicked, to the demon. "Actually, no," Kyuubi reassured calmly. "There is an sulfur monosulfide class genjutsu on your chakra system, making it look like any normal shinobi's. I put it on you just before you went to Kana. Not even Sharingan and Byakugan can detect this genjutsu." Naruto sighed in relief. "Thanks, Kyuubi," he said, and meant it. An idea came to mind, and he quickly made some hand seals. Fuiten. Tatsumaki Oni. That would probably deal with Anko and Kakashi. The Sharingan user couldn't copy this one. A mini tornado whipped up, and Naruto, using his hands to control it, directed it at Kakashi and Anko. They didn't have a chance. Anko was sucked up by the winds before she could react, and flung brutally on the ground, hard enough to render her instantly unconscious. Then Naruto focused on Kakashi, who was badly buffeted, but still standing. He would have to use another jutsu. Fuiten. Kei's Yeba. Invisible blades of wind suddenly cut mercilessly at the copy ninja, tearing his flesh to ribbons. Blood spurted, and Kakashi fell like a useless marionette. Naruto dispassionately surveyed the scene before him, and then summoned a raven. Take me about 10 miles from here," he told his summons. He needed to get away, and fast. The raven bowed his head and allowed Naruto to climb onto its back. Then it spread enormous wings and took off with one smoother, powerful flap. As they flew, Naruto and Kyuubi reviewed the battle in their heads. "That was a good battle," Kyuubi commented. "Yeah." The frown didn't leave Naruto's face. Something had just occurred to him. He had forgotten all about dujutsu like the Sharingan whilst fighting. A dujutsu like that enabled its user to match almost anyone, provided they had the required amount of chakra. This was not exactly an extremely serious problem to Naruto in terms of the chakra supply. It was that the abilities of the Sharingan, the copying abilities, were more than enough to counter many jutsu, thus rendering some of the opponent's abilities null and void. In a battle, each jutsu a shinobi had in his arsenal gave him an edge on the opponent, and if each jutsu was rendered useless, then that shinobi was in trouble. Naruto frowned again. He needed to find a way to counteract the Sharingan, just in case he had to fight Kakashi, Sasuke, or Kami forbid, Itachi. He thought again. The most obvious way to counteract the Sharingan's copying abilities was to make sure it had nothing to copy. But how? There were a few jutsus without hand seals, but not nearly enough in his respective chakra elements. And not all jutsus could be converted to be done sans hand seals. He would just have to learn to do the hand seals for all the jutsu he knew that were B rank or below at an extremely fast rate. Also, those that he used rather frequently, he could work on doing without the hand seals. But he knew that he couldn't do many A-ranked jutsu at the speed required to give Sharingan a run for its money. And he definitely could not do any S-ranked jutsu hand seals that fast. He could practice, yes, but there was only so fast he could get, and he was sure that he would never be able to do them without hand seals. That meant he would have to have something else to rely on, apart from his Kodachi, hand-seal jutsus, and non-seal jutsus. "How about chakra manipulation?" broke in Kyuubi's voice suddenly, giving Naruto a slight start. "Your chakra is wind-natured, and wind element chakra has a natural cutting edge. You should use that to your advantage. For instance, if an opponent rendered your arms useless, and tied you legs, you could run your chakra on the outside of your skin, and its natural cutting ability would sever the ropes binding you. You wouldn't even have to concentrate on giving it a cutting edge like other ninja with different chakra elements." A smile spread across Naruto's face. Kyuubi's idea was pure genius. "Thanks, Kyuubi," he said to the demon. "You just gave me an idea." Kyuubi's curiosity was aroused. "What idea?" he aside. Naruto smiled slightly before answering. Well, you talked about running chakra down my body, and it gave me inspiration. If I coat my fingers in chakra, a normal shinobi will not be able to see it, and, because of the natural cutting edge that my wind element chakra has, I will be able to cut them with just a touch. Kyuubi's eyes widened. Now that was pure genius. Naruto thought some more, as another idea entered his head. He was jerked from his train of thought however, when the raven stopped, landing gently on the ground. "We are here, Uzumaki-sama," I informed Naruto. The blonde slid off the raven's back, thanked him absent-mindedly and sat on the ground as the raven poofed away. Then he snapped his fingers suddenly, and drew out a blank scroll and his reed pen, and began writing furiously. When he had finished recording his thoughts, he resealed the scroll, and turned to Kyuubi, Tenchi. "We'll camp here for tonight." The duo set up camp, and were soon asleep, their bodies exhausted. Naruto silently reviewed the jutsus he could do with super fast hand seals, as he and Kyuubi sped through the trees. A smirk grew on his masked face as he realized that there were quite a few. Rasengan, Fuuden, Rasengan, Kokyongyo no Jutsu, Shihahapo Shuriken, Bunshin Daibukuha, Sweden, Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu, Fuuden, Kei's Yeba and a lot more. He had also perfected the aspects of chakra manipulation he had thought of earlier, like coating his fingers in his wind-natured chakra, making it into a technique. He called it Fuuden, Sashiki Tesaki, literally cutting fingers. This technique, depending on how much he honed his chakra, could give a superficial cut, or even sever a limb. The 12-year-old was extremely proud of this technique. Not even Sharingan could counteract it. He had exploited his wind-natured chakra even more in the past few days, and come up with 3 techniques, one involving Shin, and the other an actual technique. The one with Shin had occurred to him when he was practicing with the Kodachi one day, running the chakra along the blade. He had put 2 and 2 together, realizing that if his chakra had natural cutting ability and his sword a cutting edge, then the damage wreaked on his opponent if he stabbed him with a combination of the 2 was almost incomprehensible. The other was more complicated, and was more like a hybrid of Rasengan and Sashiki Tesaki. He called it Fuuden, Rensei Ude, the drilling arm. In this jutsu, he surrounded each of his arms with chakra, and then rotated the chakra around his arms so that they resembled twin drills. The destructive power of this jutsu was off the charts. The first time he had tried it, on a tree, it had almost done more damage than a Rasengan. The third technique was simply chakra manipulation. In this, he covered his body with a thin layer of chakra, and then sharpened the edges of the chakra. Just like the Sashiki Tesaki, if he touched someone or something with his body then, depending on how much he sharpened his chakra, the person would simply receive a superficial cut or lose a limb, vital organ or his life. Because of the sharpening aspect of the jutsu, Naruto called it Fuuden, Hitomi Naifu, the body knife technique. However, even though he had created all of these techniques, he was nowhere near perfecting them. His chakra control was only as good as it could get at his age, much less with the enormous amounts of chakra he had. Plus he was unable to make the chakra for the Hitomi Naifu cover his body evenly to create an excellent defensive offense. In addition, the Rensei Ude's recoil always managed to harm him superficially. But even though it was superficial, it still harmed him, and a jutsu that caused harm to both the victim and the user was not very profitable. The only one even close to perfection was the Sashiki Tesaki, and he still had only a 7 in 10 chance of successfully executing the jutsu. "I need to practice more," he thought determinedly. "I can't have Junin attacking me like that again and not be able to easily defeat them." Che, they didn't even have to attack. It was that stupid Kunoichi. Kyuubi chuckled. "Well, you are an S-class nuke nin with a bounty of 45 million ryo on your head. I think it is safe to assume that you have more than a few enemies." Naruto chuckled. True. A silence fell between shinobi and demon as they flew through the trees. They knew they had much more to face. Kakashi awoke slowly. He blinked in confusion as his disoriented mind attempted to place his surroundings. The Cyclopean shinobi turned his head stiffly, noting the pain in his body from several bandaged areas on his torso, legs and arms. The memories came rushing back as he caught sight of Nara Shikaku and Sarutobi Asuma sitting by the campfire. Anko was nowhere in sight. Akuma must have caught her too, he mused. It seemed that only he and the Kunoichi had been harmed. With a grunt, Kakashi raised himself slowly to a sitting position, extremely relieved that he could still move if he needed to. Hearing the grunt, Asuma and Shikaku looked over at Kakashi. Their faces lightened as they realized that their comrade was finally awake and functioning. Finally. We were beginning to worry, said Sarutobi Asuma, smiling with the ever-present cigarette dangling from the corner of his mouth. Kakashi's one visible eye widened. Why? How long have I been out? He asked, his voice gravelly from lack of use. Shikaku frowned. About 2 days. Those wounds were bad. Kakashi shook his head. I've never seen that jutsu before, he commented. Nor have I seen the one he used on Anko. How is she, by the way? She's fine, answered Asuma. On watch. The copy ninja nodded. Then the entire team was ready to go again. Silence blanketed the three shinobi as their minds simultaneously renewed the battle. Then Shikaku spoke up. Did you notice Akuma's hesitation to attack? He had even attempted to pass us without beginning a fight. Not even after Anko threatened him would he attack. Plus, he left us all alive. I was only knocked out. Asuma here didn't even suffer an injury. You were the worst, and, admit it, you've been hurt worse. There is something we're missing. Asuma and Kakashi nodded in agreement. Then Asuma began to speak. I didn't tell anyone but the Hokage this before, but Akuma and I have met before. Figured as much, commented Kakashi. He seemed to know you. Asuma nodded, a faraway look in his eyes. Yeah, the first time I met him, Team 10 was on a protection mission in the Stone Country, in Iwagakure no Sato. Akuma passed us, on the way to Omegakure no Sato, and nodded to me exactly as he did when he met us, as if he knew me. And I had never seen him before. He also seemed to know Shikamaru, Ino and Choji, which is extremely strange. Knowing me, not so much. I'm in the bingo book. Ino, Choji and Shikamaru? Very suspicious. They haven't even been out of the village properly, and they're not even half strong or experienced enough to be in the bingo book or even gain a reputation of their own. He even rescued Ino when she was kidnapped by a rogue Iwa Nin in Omegakure. That shinobi is extremely skilled with his kodachi. He was just playing with me when I attacked him. He's definitely improved since the last time I saw him. His chakra's off the charts. Shikaku shook his head. That shinobi is one big mystery. And what of the fox on his shoulder? Asuma shrugged. That I don't know about. He didn't have it when I saw him last. Kakashi spoke up. I don't know what it is, but that shinobi was strangely familiar, somehow. I just felt as if I knew him, somehow, from somewhere. Another silence fell on the trio, as they tried to make sense of their observations, but to no avail. After a few minutes, Shikaku stood. How do you feel about traveling today, Kakashi? He queried. Kakashi shrugged carefully, assessing his body. I can travel. How far are we from Konoha, exactly? Asuma answered. About 5 days worth of traveling. We carried you. Kakashi's eyes crinkled. I think I can manage it. When are you leaving? Right now, after we eat, replied Shikaku. The Nara called the kunoichi and the quartet had a quick, tasteless meal of ninja rations. Then they packed up the tents and other items, extinguished the fire, and set out for Konoha. They had information for the Sandaime Hokage. As Kakashi's wounds were not serious enough to hinder his traveling speed, they could travel normally. The team soon reached the gates of Konoha, greeting the Junin at the gates as they entered their village. The group of Junin headed directly for the Hokage's office. The sooner this information was circulated, the better. Within minutes, the 3 shinobi and 1 kunoichi were assembled respectfully in front of the Sandaime Hokage. Back safely, I see, commented the Sandaime. How was the mission? Nara Shikaku stepped forward. He had been made team leader because of his skills in strategy and diplomacy, and now was the time to put these skills to the test. The mission was successful, Hokage-sama. However, we encountered an S-class shinobi, a missing nin, on our way back. The Hokage became alert. Seeing this, Shikaku continued. The shinobi is called Akuma Hiei. No information is known on him, except that he is a missing nin, and apparently defeated 2 ex-Akatsuki without breaking a sweat. When we encountered him, however, he did not seem inclined to fight, even after Mitarashi Anko spoke to him provocatively and gave him an ultimatum. When we attacked, he retaliated, but barely. We were defeated in under 20 minutes. 2 unknown jutsus were used on Kakashi and Anko, I was knocked out, and Asuma was caught in a genjutsu. He also carried a small crimson fox on his shoulder, and is extremely proficient with a kodachi. Sandame steepled his fingers, his face taking on a thoughtful look. Arigato gozaimasu, Shikaku. I will think more on this matter. For now, avoid the nin, I will have him investigated. You are dismissed. The four ninja bowed and shunshined away. As they disappeared, Sarutobi leaned back in his large, comfortable door. Akuma Hiei, S-Class Nukanen, brutally slaughtered 3 ex-Akatsuki, but hesitated to harm 4 Konoha Junin. Something was missing, but what? The Sandame had a feeling, maybe he should investigate this one himself. Sarutobi considered the idea in depth. Yes, he would do it. It was highly irregular, almost unheard of, but he had no paperwork. For once, all relations were stable. There was no sight of Orochimaru or the Akatsuki, and he had not taken a vacation in a while. A vacation, he could use it as his cover. The decision was made. Sarutobi would investigate this himself. Naruto walked sedately through Kumogakure's gates, nodding politely to the 2 Junin at the guard booth. As he passed through the gates, he relaxed. Even though he knew an infiltration was still possible, there was just something about returning home that made him feel safe. Then a screech filled the air, and Naruto flinched, before taking off at a run, grimacing. He had been away for so long, he had forgotten about the fangirls. The ground behind him shook as about 40 kunoichi chased him through the streets of Kumogakure. The worst part about them was that they were not just wannabe kunoichi who were easy to shake off. These kunoichi were excellent trackers and attackers. After a few minutes, he managed to shake them, though he could still hear their yells of, Akuma-kun. Squeee. Naruto shuddered, and dived into a nearby barbecue shop. The proprietor graciously welcomed him, and a waitress brought his order of 2 plates of barbecue pork. Then, halfway through his meal, a group of fangirls came in. Naruto shivered in fear, and by quick thinking, cast a henge over himself so he looked extremely different. Then he finished his barbecue, paid the owner, and exited the shop in a flash, releasing the henge as he did so. It was time to report to the Raikage. Naruto made his way to the tower, Kyuubi on his shoulder, greeting acquaintances as he passed through the busy streets. When he reached the base of the tower, he flashed his kodachi as ID at the Junin guards and ascended a few flights of stairs until he reached the familiar green door. Naruto knocked twice on it before receiving permission to enter. The masked blonde quietly opened the door and entered the room, shutting the door softly behind him. Then he looked around, and suffered the shock of his life. He had never been as glad for his mask as he was now. Almost all of the rookie 9 stood before him, with the addition of 1 genin he was completely unfamiliar with. Naruto felt surprised. On a mission alone? How old was everyone? He saw no signs of a flak jacket, so that meant that everyone was still genin level. He was 12, so that would mean that the age range would be from 11 to 14, Hyuga Neji and Shikamaru being the eldest, and Hyuga Hinata, the youngest. His eyes rested briefly on each one, recognizing them from his past. Hyuga Neji, Uchiha Sasuke, Nara Shikamaru, Yamanaka Ino, Tenten, and a boy he didn't know. Naruto scrutinized the boy for a moment. He must be my replacement, he deduced. The young shinobi had long silver hair, caught up in a high ponytail with a piece over his left eye, similar to Yamanaka Ino. He was almost pretty, with pale skin, purple eyes and delicate features, and appeared to have the same attitude complex as Sasuke, who, Naruto noticed, was looking at him with disdain. The unknown Konoha shinobi wore a mesh undershirt with a short-sleeved mid-torso black jacket, black fingerless mesh gloves, and standard black shinobi pants and sandals. Naruto shifted his gaze back to Shikamaru and Ino and nodded at them before turning to the Raikage. I am back, Raikage-sama, he said quietly, feeling the stares of the Konoha shinobi. Why are they staring so much? He asked Kyuubi. Maybe it's the fact that you look rather intimidating, despite your obvious lack of height, plus the fact that you have a fox on your shoulder? Suggested Kyuubi sarcastically. Ignoring the jab at his height, or lack of it, Naruto mentally slapped himself. He really was a doby sometimes. The Raikage smiled. Welcome back. He beckoned Naruto closer and said quietly to him. Do you mind taking on a simple D-ranked mission to show these Konoha ninja to our shinobi guest house and a place to eat? One of them, the Uchiha, was stupid enough to anger one of our shinobi on their way here. I don't trust them not to cause a fight. Relations between Kumogakure and Konohagakure are shaky enough as it is. Naruto considered it for a while before shrugging his shoulders nonchalantly. It didn't really matter. Even the Raikage didn't know his true identity, so how could they discover it? And even if they updated the bingo book with Kumogakure as his base, nothing too major would come of it. Sure, Raikage-sama, he replied quietly. Then he stepped away from the cage's desk and waited for the village leader to tell them what he had just decided. The Raikage cleared his throat to attract the Konoha ninja's attention. I have assigned you a guide. He gestured to the silent Naruto, and Shikamaru's eyes narrowed. Akuma here will give you an escort to a place to eat and show you to our shinobi guest house. Shikamaru, obviously the leader of the group, bowed slightly and diplomatically thanked the Raikage for his generosity. But it was obvious to Naruto that Shikamaru knew exactly why they had been assigned a guide. Ino stared discreetly at their guide, the Akuma Hiei. It seemed that he had instantly recognized her and Shikamaru, just as they recognized him. The blonde Kunoichi gazed at the small crimson fox on his shoulder. When did he get it? He had not possessed it the last time she saw him. That fox was no pet. She made a mental note to warn the others, just in case. A voice broke her out of her reverie. Sasuke was speaking to their shinobi escort. Your name? He queried arrogantly to the other, who was barely as tall as him. Ino bit back a groan. Sasuke was so disgusting. If the other ninja was shorter than him, it did not mean that Sasuke was the better of the two. In fact, everyone with half a brain should be able to tell that Akuma could kill them all with his pinky finger. She looked at Sasuke again, shaking her head. Just because he had been promoted to elite genin after their last A-ranked mission, that had been mistakenly labeled a C rank, he felt as if he were the strongest shinobi ever. What was Kakashi teaching them? Any good shinobi would know that their guide was an extremely powerful ninja, even if they didn't pick up that he was a missing nin. Ino turned back to the one-sided conversation. Akuma had ignored the arrogant question, opting instead to ask Tenten if they preferred to eat or rest first. Tenten turned to Shikamaru. The lazy genin thought for a while, then responded to Tenten that they should probably secure lodgings first. Their guide nodded and continued down the road. Meanwhile, Sasuke was fuming at being ignored by both his teammates and the lowly guide. He decided to ask again. What is your name? He queried, less arrogantly. The masked shinobi turned slightly to face Sasuke. The mask reminded the Team 7 member distinctly of his sensei, but the wearer's manner did not. His sensei was easygoing. This stranger was a no-nonsense person. I do not wish to disclose that fact. Sasuke got so angry, he shut up. Tenten snickered as the small group came into view of the guest house. Sasuke was always lording it over others in Konoha. Now it was his time to see how it felt. She exchanged an amused glance with Ino as they entered the guest house. Their guide gestured to Shikamaru. You should go ahead and reserve your rooms. He recommended quietly. Shikamaru nodded and stepped up to the receptionist. The lazy Nara shinobi absent-mindedly gave the fangirl receptionist the list of rooms needed. However, his outward appearance belied what was really going on behind his blank exterior. His mind was in turmoil. Akuma Hiei. Is this his base? If so, why didn't he try to conceal himself from us Konoha ninja, knowing he attacked a Junin team a few weeks ago? Or could it be that he doesn't care if we know his base, or could this not be his base? What is he doing with that fox? It is obviously not a pet. When did he get it? Why did he call the Raikage, Sama, with that familiar tone? And how did they look as if they were well acquainted with each other? Does this mean that he is closely allied with Kumogakure? And if so, why did a ninja allied with Kumogakure attack ninja from Konohagakure when the two villages were attempting to make an alliance? Shikamaru shook his head slightly, returning to the present. So many unanswered questions. He was getting a headache. The man was a veritable mystery. These questions would have to wait for a period when he was alone and could fit the pieces together, because there was definitely a puzzle to be solved here. The receptionist had finished adding up the bill why did it take her so long, and was currently searching for all the keys. Her head popped up from behind the desk as she located the last one, smiling brilliantly at him. Here you go, Nara-san. Shikamaru took the keys and nodded politely to her before distributing them and indicating to their guard that the group was now ready to go. Naruto let his body relax as he stood to the side. Thoughts swirled in his head like a mini whirlpool. Obviously, Shikamaru knew that his father had been attacked a few weeks ago and by whom. Naruto was no fool. He had seen the startled look of recognition, followed swiftly by confusion, when he entered the room. I'll need to be more careful outside the village and in my house, the blonde thought. Ninja can't storm Kumogakure, for fear of making an enemy in the form of the Raikage, but they can do infiltration missions, or ambush me outside. He exhaled slightly. The life of an S-classed missing nin was not easy, no, not easy at all. Then there was Ino. It seemed like every time Naruto saw her, she got prettier. She also recognized him on first sight, but it seemed that Sasuke had not, which in itself was extremely strange. Not recognize an S-class missing nin? Sasuke was filing in his place as the Dobi, it seemed. And then there was his attitude. How could any self-respecting shinobi alienate a ninja of the village they were trying to make an alliance with? Especially one who seemed to be close to the Raikage. Naruto's fingers practically itched to punch some sense into the arrogant bastard. Naruto suddenly returned to the present as he heard Shikamaru clear his throat. The group was ready to eat. Wordlessly, Naruto turned out of the shinobi guest house and headed for the best barbecue restaurant in town. As the small group trudged down the main street of Kumogakure, Sasuke was quiet. This was mainly because Tenten and Ino, in hushed, displeased whispers, had informed him of the identity of their guide and the ninja he had attempted to lord it over. Kami, how could he have been so stupid? Akuma Hiei, why didn't he recognize the S-classed nuke nin? Inadvertently, another S-classed nuke nin filled his mind, and he growled. He would not go there. He had sworn to Sandaime not to go after Itachi, no matter what happened. Sasuke still didn't know exactly what happened on the night of the infamous Uchiha clan massacre, but the Hokage had dropped enough hints for him to pick up that Itachi should not be the one he should direct his anger at. He wasn't stupid, he knew that the Uchiha had started to become corrupt. Sasuke scowled. He would not fall like any of the other Uchiha. Not like Itachi, who became hunted, and certainly not like his weak family members, who couldn't even fight to save themselves. They were not worthy of being Uchihas. He was the last and the best Uchiha, Itachi didn't count. He would revive his clan, and make it even stronger, and greater than it had ever been, by himself. He didn't need anyone except a wife. Maybe Sakura. That girl was getting smarter and stronger, plus she thought he liked her. Yes, Sakura would be the one. At least she was pleasing to look at, since she had grown into her forehead. Plus, she didn't like the Dobi. The last Uchiha smirked. Life was much better without the blonde idiot. Good riddance, Dobi, he thought maliciously. His thoughts returned to Sakura. Haruno Sakura, you are mine, he declared mentally. You will aid me in reviving my clan. The motley group of ninja turned off of the main road onto a quieter, yet still busy secondary one, their silent guide leading the way. They walked in silence for about a minute, then without warning, a shuriken flew out of nowhere, heading on a deadly path for Akuma. The Konoha ninja were too surprised to act. They could only watch, frozen, as the missile advanced on the shinobi. But their fears were unnecessary. Akuma suddenly spun, deftly catching the shuriken between fingers without harming himself, and hurled it back to the source. Then he straightened and called out in an amused tone. Kami, you never change, do you? Come on out now. A chuckle sounded, and a shinobi stepped forward from behind a tree at the side of the road. Even Sasuke showed some shock. None of them had even noticed the ninja. If it had been a battle, a chorus shudder went through the group as the full implications set in. The shinobi approached Akuma casually, and the two shinobi greeted each other with a friendly handshake. Shikamaru watched them closely. For two shinobi to greet each other with a handshake spoke volumes of the trust between them. It was way too easy to slip a poisoned senbon into another's wrist during a handshake. The two men's knuckles turned white with force as they shook. Again, a handshake wasn't all it seemed. It was also a display of power. Shikamaru's sharp eyes caught the stranger's slight wince as Akuma released his hand. His estimation of the missing nin went up a notch. Akuma was obviously the stronger of the duo. In the meanwhile, the Konoha ninja had taken the chance to study the unfamiliar shinobi. The first thing that had struck them was the stranger's eyes and hair. They were both distinctive silver. His silver hair lay in a silken sheet about his shoulders, looking even more well cared for than Neji's satiny mane. Said Genin regarded the man's hair in awe and slight envy. The unknown shinobi wore a mesh shirt, black cargo pants, and over the mesh shirt, a black jacket that looked similar to the Konoha nin's Chunin vest. "Sup Akuma," the unknown man said, grinning. He was taller than Akuma by about a foot, suddenly emphasizing the Konoha genin that based on his stature, Akuma was just about their age or very short for his age. The former seemed more probable, somehow. However, it only raised more questions in their minds. Who was this young ninja who was obviously stronger than a Junin? And what rank was he? "I can never catch you, can I?" the man continued. Akuma shook his blonde head, and the genin, used to mask wearers from Hitaki Kakashi, could see that he was smiling rather exasperatedly. "You've been trying since the first time we met. Why don't you just give up?" The silver-haired shinobi shook his head, luminous locks flying in vehement denial. "Never," he grinned. Then he turned to the watching Konoha nin. "Hey Akuma, who are these?" Their calm guide answered his friend. "These are some visiting Konoha ninja. Raikage-sama assigned me as guide." The other shinobi glanced over the group, and then introduced himself in a friendly manner. "Hey Konoha nin, my name is Shoshi. Hope you enjoy your stay in Kumogakure. Don't let Akuma here spoil it for you." He chuckled mischievously as a vein popped on Akuma's forehead. "I better be going," he finished hurriedly, poofing away. Akuma turned back to the group, muttering under his breath. "Can't believe he is older than me, tch." He regained his usual cool demeanor and gestured for them to follow him into a certain barbecue shop, not far from where they were currently standing. The group walked into the shop, and the proprietor greeted Naruto with a small smile. It was the same barbecue shop that he had ducked into earlier in the day. Naruto returned the greeting and walked over to a booth large enough for all the Konoha nin to sit at. The waitress came to take their orders, immediately gaining a flirtatious air when she arrived. Sasuke began to preen, sending a smug look at Yuki, Akuma, Shikamaru, and Neji. But his ego was in for an unpleasant surprise as the fangirl waitress ignored every male at the table except Akuma. "Akuma-san, fancy meeting you here twice in one day. What would you like?" she simpered. The group couldn't see his face, but sensed his slight embarrassment and exasperation. Apparently, he had fangirls. Lots of them. Akuma began. "Well, actually I'm a guide for these ninja from Konoha. Raikage-sama told me to, show them around for a bit." The girl beamed. "Oh, that's wonderful," she breathed, batting her lashes coyly. Akuma shuddered slightly, and Shikamaru and Neji smirked. The quintessential curse of the fangirl had struck. The waitress turned to the group. "Hello, what can I get you?" she queried in a disinterested tone, not even looking at Sasuke. The group placed their orders, Sasuke still in shock. How could there be a member of the female who couldn't resist his charms? Tenten, Ino and Hinata came to mind, but he shrugged it off. They didn't count, but he was an Uchiha. Uchihas were to be swooned over. The last Uchiha returned quickly to the present as a large plate of steaming, aromatic barbecue pork was rested in the center of the table. Sasuke pushed his brooding thoughts to a corner of his mind and began to eat. His thoughts could wait until later. In about an hour and a half, they had polished off the 2 large plates of delicious barbecue pork. Akuma still managing to eat with his mask on. The Konoha ninja turned away in frustration. Did the masked ninja have a convention every year on how to eat without revealing their faces or something? Akuma rose to his feet, and approached the proprietor at the front to pay him the bill. The group followed him, nodding at the proprietor as they passed. It was time to return to the shinobi guest house. The Konoha genin followed their guide back to the guest house, and bid him goodbye. "Arigato gozaimasu, Akuma-san," said Ino and Tenten in unison, bowing slightly. Akuma gave them a slight nod, and raised his hand in farewell as he walked away. A pair of sharp, observant brown eyes followed the retreating figure of Akuma Hiei. So he's allied with Kumogakure. The observer mused silently. So did the Raikage know of the attack? Probably not. He wouldn't have agreed to the treaty if he knew Konoha shinobi had made the first threatening move. Sarutobi put his aged hands together in a familiar sequence of seals. He shook his head as the genjutsu settled on him, making him invisible. Being Hokage took away the thrill of going on missions. But now was not the time to reminiscence. The longer he stayed away from Konoha, the higher the chances of the discovery of his absence and the chances of something bad happening as a result. Sarutobi walked behind the shinobi, making sure to keep a sharp eye out for person with dujutsu abilities like the Sharingan and Byakugan, just in case. Akuma walked on, oblivious to the Hokage stalking him. The young shinobi turned sharply off of the main road onto a hidden pathway, and began walking up the stone walk. Sarutobi followed, ever conscious of physical traps and genjutsus. As the shinobi entered his house, Sarutobi slipped around to the side, angling his path so he could get a glimpse of the shinobi inside his house. However, the Sandaime Hokage found he was unable to discern anything inside the house. A smile of surprise crossed his face. This young ninja is truly worthy of his reputation. A genjutsu? Well, I am the Hokage for a reason. Sarutobi made a long sequence of hand seals. Genjutsu. Chua no Jutsu. The cage's body began to shift, becoming translucent in some areas, hazy in others. He looked like a cross between a shimmering mirage and a smokescreen. Sarutobi nodded in satisfaction. This was a genjutsu of his own creation. It could neutralize any genjutsu cast on him or in an area he wished to enter. Sarutobi nodded again. He could see through the windows of the house. It had worked. He watched as the shinobi entered his bedroom, systematically removing his outer clothing as he went. The cloak was the first to go, revealing a young, well-sculpted, tanned body. His youth had been hinted at in his stature and build, and now it was confirmed. Sarutobi blinked as his eyes took in the small, but well-built body. This shinobi couldn't be more than 15 judging by his body structure. Then the weapons pouch was next, and the metal knuckles and black fingerless gloves. The young male sat down on the bed, his lithe body completely relaxed. Then he bent down and unbuckled his leather boots, flopping boneless backwards onto the bed after he had finished. Sarutobi contemplated the young ninja's relaxed state. He must be quite confident about the genjutsu placed around the house, he surmised. He had to admit that, based on the complexity of the genjutsu he had encountered, there really was no reason to worry. If he had not developed that genjutsu neutralization technique, he would have been defeated. The cage's estimation of the shinobi rose another notch. However, he was drawn from his inner thoughts as the shinobi began moving again. He was taking off his mask. Sarutobi would remember that moment until his dying day. Even if he went back in time to that moment, he would never be able to prepare his mind for the shock he received. Actually, it was a double shock, somewhat like a double-layered genjutsu. You neutralize one layer quickly, yet another hits you in the face. At first the older shinobi had thought that it was his late student come to life in a 12-year-old body. But then the mask dropped fully to reveal whiskered cheeks, and Sarutobi had another surprise. It was Naruto. Wait, Naruto? A feeling of acute sadness filled the Sandaime Hokage. He had to get Naruto to return. The Hokage left his vantage point and went around to the front of the house. Raising an aged hand, he knocked on the front door 3 times in rapid succession. While he waited, he released the invisibility and neutralization genjutsus he had placed on himself. He heard the sound of cautious footsteps and the door slowly opened to reveal an armed, wary, fully masked and redressed Naruto. At the sight of the Sandaime Hokage on his doorstep, his azure eyes widened, and then his shoulders slumped. The preteen opened the door fully, allowing the Hokage to enter. The older man came in hesitantly, shutting the door behind him. The two males stared at each other, the air between them full of unspoken emotion. Naruto? Sandaime said sadly. The young male sighed heavily. Sarutobi Oji-san, why did you come after me? Sarutobi stepped forward and placed a paternal arm around Naruto's young shoulders, guiding him to a sofa in the adjoining room. They sat, and Sarutobi began with determination. It was time for Naruto to learn of his parentage. Naruto, I did not come to Kumogakure to look for you. Well, not directly. I had come to spy on one Akuma Hiei who had been attacked by a Junin team from Konohagakure. The Junin in the team reported to me that the unknown shinobi was hesitant to engage them in battle. This was unusual, to say the least, because that same shinobi had quickly and efficiently killed 2 ex-Akatsuki. So, since I had not taken a mission in a while, I decided to check you out. Highly irregular, I know, but there you go. The Hokage shrugged. Besides, Akuma Hiei was an S-class ninja. By the way, that genjutsu on the house is extremely complex. Congratulations. Even I had trouble getting through. A smile crossed Naruto's masked face, and his shoulders relaxed. Sarutobi continued. I came, Naruto, to inform you of your parentage, and to ask you to return to Konoha. Naruto's brow furrowed. Parentage? Who were my parents? I never understood why it was such a big secret. After a while, I figured that no one actually knew. Sarutobi shook his head. After realizing how much Naruto resembled Minato, he came to the conclusion that it would be impossible to conceal his heritage from other persons. It was time for all to be revealed. But something had to be done first. Naruto, could you remove your make? I feel as if I'm talking to a stranger. He saw Naruto's hesitant expression, and his heart sank. Had he destroyed his surrogate grandson? Naruto watched, his heart hurting, as his surrogate grandfather and Hokage's face fell in acute disappointment and sadness. Should I take off the mask? He asked Kyuubi. The fox didn't hesitate in his opinion. Yes, Kit, your Hokage has no ill will towards you. In fact, he was the only one who truly loved you, as far as I can tell. The demon said nothing more, although he knew Sarutobi would reveal something extremely shocking to Naruto, something that had been hidden from him since birth, for his own safety. Naruto returned to the present. Lifting his hand to his face, he grasped the mask and drew it down. Sarutobi's face and heart brightened. Maybe there was still a chance of redemption. The Sandaime Hokage gathered his thoughts and began. Exactly 12 years ago, Konoha had a man called Namikaze Minato as the Yondaime Hokage. Minato had just ascended to the Hokage's position, about 2 years before, and had married a woman named Uzumaki Kushina. He saw Naruto's eyes cloud with confusion, and smiled before beginning again. Minato was my student, and he and Kushina were very dear to me. The Yondaime ruled for a short time, but those were the most blissful years Konoha has ever seen. Then on October 10th, the Kyuubi no Kitsune attacked. Naruto felt an immense sadness at the back of his mind, emanating from the gigantic fox demon sealed inside him. Kyuubi never said it, but from his actions, Naruto gathered that he was extremely regretful of Konoha's loss. He tuned back into Sarutobi's explanation. There was much bloodshed. Countless ninja rose to protect Konoha and died in vain. The village was in a panic. Could the demon be stopped? Then their beloved Hokage came to their rescue, as a good Hokage always does. However, his solution came at a giant cost to both him and the village. Naruto broke in. Yes, he lost his life, and Konohagakure lost a great Hokage. Sarutobi shook his head. True, but that is not all he lost. He also lost his wife and son. Sarutobi could see Naruto's confusion, it was almost palpable. You see, Minato and Kushina had had a baby boy on October the 10th, a few hours before Minato faced the Kyuubi. Kushina died in childbirth, and Minato was forced to seal the Kyuubi no Kitsune into his precious son, whom he loved more than life itself, at the cost of his own life. He believed his son would be viewed as a hero, but the fickle people of Konoha did not oblige their beloved Yondaime's last wish, instead treating his son as if he were no more than trash. A tear rolled down Naruto's cheek as agonized blue eyes, so much like Minato's, stared at his surrogate grandfather. Without a word, the Hokage put his arms around Minato's son, Namikaze Naruto. There were times when everyone needed a hug, even the Shinigami himself. After a few moments, Naruto composed himself. Why, Oja-san? He queried in a shaky voice, his body visibly trembling from the shock. Sarutobi understood the question Naruto was unable to ask. Why wasn't he told? On the night of the Kyuubi's attack, the first person to see you after Minato's death was a civilian, he said sadly. The idiot believed that the Kyuubi no Kitsune had killed their beloved Yondaime and transformed into a child in order to wreak more havoc on the village whenever it wanted. Soon the entire village believed the lie. I knew that it would be useless to dissuade them, and I couldn't broadcast it. Your father had too many enemies, mainly in Iwagakure. I had planned to tell you when you reached 10, but by that time, the hatred had proved too great. Any normal person would have succumbed long ago. You are strong, Naruto. The young boy dried his tears with the back of his hand and looked up at Sarutobi. So my name is Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto? Sarutobi nodded. Yes. There is also the matter of your inheritance. The Yondaime Hokage had a clan complex, along with a sizable bank account, all entrusted to you for when you became of age. There is also a box of scrolls, containing 2 jutsus that defined the Yondaime. Kyuubi chuckled in the back of Naruto's mind. This should be good. Kid will finally realize my shock. Naruto heard the demon, but didn't understand. Nani? What do you mean? Kyuubi chuckled again. Just listen to your Oja-san. You'll see. Naruto returned to the present. Sarutobi was speaking. Those 2 jutsus are called Hiraishin no Jutsu and Rasengan. Hiraishin was what earned Minato his moniker of Konoha's Yellow Flash. Naruto shook his head, sun-kissed locks flying in complete bewilderment. He could hear Kyuubi laughing, but ignored him. Rasengan? Hiraishin? He repeated in a dazed voice. Those were the names of 2 jutsus he created, and now Sandaime was telling him that Yondaime had created 2 jutsus with exactly the same name. Whoa! Naruto looked up at Sarutobi, his face expressing his disbelief. Sarutobi smiled down at him. Are you familiar with the names? He asked. Naruto smirked. Hell, yeah. However, he simply nodded, holding up his hand when Sarutobi began to speak again. He held his right hand out in front of him, between himself and Sarutobi, and began gathering and molding chakra. A small, bright blue sphere of concentrated chakra began to appear out of thin air, swirling furiously and rapidly growing to the size of a fist-sized rock. Naruto looked at Sarutobi. Is this what the Yondaime called Rasengan? Sarutobi could only nod. Next, Naruto, after allowing the sphere of chakra to dissipate, drew out one of his special kunai. He threw it across the room, and was on the other side and back to Sarutobi in 2 yellow flashes. He turned to his surrogate grandfather. And is that what he called Hiraishin? Again, Sarutobi nodded, but found his mouth parched with shock. How? Naruto looked at him, a solemn expression on his face. I created it. Sarutobi could only shake his head. He really was Minato's son. He may surpass you, Minato, he thought to his deceased student and surrogate son. You were older than him when you completed the Hiraishin, and up until your death, the Rasengan was not complete. Aloud he said, would you come back to Konoha, Naruto? Naruto's body immediately tensed, and a shuddered, hurt look passed over his expressive face. He shook his head. Arigato, Oja-san, but there is no one there for me, except you. With that sentence, Sarutobi understood everything. The reason behind his departure, his unwillingness to show his face. He believed no one cared for him, with the exception of Sarutobi himself. The Sandaime Hokage scowled, damning the council all over again in his head. You know, Naruto, that's not true. The preteen raised his face to his surrogate grandfather's, the question clear in his eyes. Sarutobi continued, Yamanaka Inoichi, Nara Shikaku, Mitarashi Anko and Sarutobi Asuma, my grandson, all volunteered to take you in at various stages of your childhood, but their requests were denied by the council. Also, Hitaki Kakashi and Amino Iruka, your 2 teachers, care for you. At the mention of Kakashi's name, Naruto's face darkened. I don't trust Kakashi, was all he said. Sarutobi sadly noted the lack of sensei at the end of Kakashi's name. It seemed that the damage Kakashi had done to the relationship between himself and his student was irreparable. Sarutobi spoke again. So, will you come back? Naruto's eyes took on a faraway look, and Sarutobi knew he was probably consulting Kyuubi. He was right. Naruto appeared in the huge, dark cavern, his feet submerged up to mid-calf in murky water. Yet, his feet were not wet. He was standing in front of a giant cage. Then, through the darkness, a pair of crimson eyes came, growing as they came closer to the cage. You should go, Kit, said the familiar growling voice of Kyuubi. The huge crimson 9-tailed fox sat on his haunches, looking at Naruto's stationary figure. Sarutobi seems to be speaking the truth. Besides, you are strong enough to kill any one of those pathetic Konoha ninja that are stupid enough to attack you. I say go. You have nothing to lose. The young boy nodded, and then disappeared from his mindscape. Sarutobi watched as Naruto's eyes refocused. His heart fluttered nervously against his ribcage, something that had not happened in a while. What would Naruto's decision be? The cage grew alert as the Namikaze heir opened his mouth. I will come. Sarutobi had to forcibly restrain himself from crying in relief. Instead, all he did was smile. Thank you, Naruto, he said quietly. You have no idea how much this means to me or your father. Naruto nodded, and then a smile broke out on his unmasked face. Thank you, Oja-san.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.